Welcome to the Sleeping Through History channel. Tonight, we embark on a journey through time and belief, exploring some of the most mysterious and powerful visions of the end of the world. From ancient myths to modern movements, humanity has always been drawn to the idea of apocalypse, a word that means not just destruction, but revelation and unveiling. These stories come from every corner of the earth. Some are held sacred, others are dismissed as cultish or extreme. But when we listen closely, side by side, they begin to sound familiar. A world in crisis, a chosen few, a final reckoning, and sometimes something new on the other side. So we pause and gently ask the questions. Why are we so drawn to these endings? Why do some become doctrine, while others are cast aside as delusion? And if so much of what we believe depends on where and when we were born, how can any of us be sure we've chosen the right story? We won't answer those questions tonight, but we will explore them, quietly, thoughtfully, through 21 apocalyptic visions from around the world, from Mesopotamian flood myths and Norse firestorms, to Christian tribulations and New Age ascensions. Each story is a window into our fears, our longings, and the patterns we keep repeating. So find a comfortable place. Let your mind settle, relax. And as the candlelight flickers and the world grows still, we begin our journey through the many ways we've imagined the end. The Great Flood, Noah's Ark, Judeo-Christian tradition. The Great Flood, as described in the book of Genesis, is a foundational apocalyptic narrative. It portrays divine judgment on a corrupt world, leading to the near-total destruction of life. This flood marks the end of one age and the beginning of another, making it one of the earliest and most influential religious visions of the end of the world. The Great Flood narrative appears in the book of Genesis, chapters 6 through 9, and is one of the oldest and most influential accounts of divine destruction and renewal in religious history. Though widely recognized in Christian and Jewish traditions, it has also influenced Islamic eschatology and other flood-related myths around the world. The story begins with a bleak depiction of humanity. According to Genesis, human behavior had become so corrupted that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. God, grieved by this moral decay, decides to wipe out all living things from the face of the earth. However, one man stands apart, Noah, described as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He is chosen by God not only to survive the impending catastrophe, but also to ensure the continuity of life on earth. God instructs Noah to build an ark, a large vessel made of gopher wood, sealed with pitch, and constructed to exact specifications. The dimensions given in Genesis are 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Converting to modern measurements, the ark would have been approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, with a total volume of roughly 1.5 million cubic feet. The ark is to have 3 decks and a single door, divided into compartments to house the many species Noah is instructed to save. He is told to bring his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, along with pairs of every kind of animal. Genesis 6 mentions pairs, but Genesis 7 adds that 7 pairs of every clean animal and 1 pair of every unclean animal should be included, along with birds of every kind. Clean animals, later designated in Mosaic law as suitable for sacrifice, are given special priority. Once the ark is completed and the animals are gathered, the flood begins. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights, and at the same time, the fountains of the great deep burst forth. These dual sources of water, both atmospheric and subterranean, create a total inundation of the earth. The water rises high enough to cover even the tallest mountains, exceeding them by more than 15 cubits, or roughly 22 feet. All life outside the ark perishes. The ark drifts on the water for 150 days. Genesis does not offer details about daily life inside the ark, but it implies an extended period of survival in complete isolation. The flood represents not only a physical catastrophe, but also a total erasure of civilization and order. Only those inside the ark remain as witnesses and carriers of future life. When the water begins to recede, it is because God remembered Noah. A wind passes over the earth, the waters abate, and the ark eventually comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat, a region traditionally associated with present-day eastern Turkey. To determine whether the land is habitable again, Noah sends out a series of birds. First, a raven is released and flies back and forth until the water dries up. Then a dove is sent out. On its first flight, it finds no resting place and returns. After 7 days, Noah sends it again. This time, it returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf, signaling that plant life has begun to recover. A final release results in the dove not returning at all, suggesting that the earth is once again suitable for habitation. When the land is dry, God commands Noah to leave the ark, along with his family and all the animals. This marks the end of the flood and the beginning of a new chapter in human history. Noah's first action upon exiting the ark is to build an altar and offer sacrifices from the clean animals and birds. These offerings are received favorably, and in response, God makes a covenant not only with Noah, but with all living things. The covenant is unconditional. God promises never again to destroy the earth with a flood. As a sign of this promise, he sets a rainbow in the sky. In ancient symbolism, a bow often represented a weapon. By placing his bow in the clouds, God is symbolically hanging up his weapon of destruction. This gesture marks the flood not only as an act of judgment, but also as the beginning of a long-term divine commitment to preservation and stability. This covenant is significant in Judeo-Christian theology. It is the first of several covenants in the Hebrew Bible, and it introduces the idea that divine justice is accompanied by mercy. The flood was total, but it was not the end. It was a reset, a new beginning built on the idea of moral accountability and divine protection. In the biblical narrative, the covenant with Noah sets the stage for future relationships between God and humanity. Following the flood, the text shifts to post-apocalyptic life. Noah becomes a farmer, plants a vineyard, and eventually becomes drunk from wine. A disturbing incident involving his son Ham leads to a curse on Ham's son Canaan. Though this event lies outside the main flood narrative, it reflects a common theme in apocalyptic stories, that even after renewal, human imperfection persists. The story of the Great Flood has many parallels in other ancient traditions, particularly in Mesopotamian literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written centuries earlier, includes a flood story with striking similarities. In that version, the gods send a flood to destroy noisy, overpopulated humanity. A man named Utnapishtim is warned in secret, builds a large boat, and saves himself, his family, and animals. After the flood, he releases birds to test the land and offers sacrifices. The parallels suggest a shared ancient Near Eastern flood tradition, adapted across cultures and religions. Some scholars believe that the Genesis flood narrative borrows directly or indirectly from these older sources, but reinterprets them within a monotheistic framework. Unlike the Mesopotamian gods, who are impulsive and divided, the God of Genesis is portrayed as just, consistent, and bound by covenant. The flood is not a capricious act, but a moral decision, justified by the behavior of humanity. There has been much debate over the historicity of the flood. While there is no geological evidence for a global flood, some researchers have proposed that the story may reflect cultural memory of a large regional flood, such as one in the Mesopotamian basin, or the flooding of the Black Sea around 5600 BCE. These events, while not global, would have been catastrophic to the people living in those regions and may have been mythologized over time. In Islamic tradition, the story of Noah, or Nuh, is also central. The Quran includes multiple references to the flood, emphasizing Noah's long and patient efforts to guide his people, their rejection of his warnings, and the divine punishment that follows. The Quran adds details not found in the Genesis account, such as a fourth son of Noah who refuses to board the ark and drowns. Like the Bible, the Quran portrays Noah as a prophet and a righteous man, chosen to preserve life and fulfill divine instruction. The legacy of the flood story is extensive. It has inspired centuries of religious interpretation, artistic representation, and moral reflection. From medieval manuscripts to children's books, the image of the ark floating above a drowned world continues to resonate. The idea that destruction can lead to renewal, that the world can be wiped clean and restarted, remains a powerful narrative in both religious and secular storytelling. The flood also established a pattern seen in many apocalyptic traditions: a period of corruption, a divine judgment, a surviving remnant, and a new beginning. These elements are echoed in later religious texts, such as the Book of Revelation, the Islamic Day of Judgment, and even modern apocalyptic movements. The flood is not only a historical or mythological story, it is a template for understanding how endings lead to new creation. As an apocalypse, the Great Flood represents a turning point. It is not the final end of the world, but it is the end of a world, the world that was. It demonstrates how apocalyptic events are not always about total annihilation, but about transformation. The world after the flood is not the same as the one before. It is reordered, re-established, and renewed. The story of Noah and the flood continues to be told across cultures and generations. Whether seen as historical fact, symbolic truth, or literary myth, it remains one of the most enduring apocalyptic visions in human history. Zoroastrian Frashokereti, Zoroastrianism. Frashokereti in Zoroastrianism is a vision of the world's final renewal. Unlike apocalypses centered on destruction, this one focuses on restoration. It marks the end of evil, the resurrection of the dead, and the beginning of a perfected world. It fulfills the core definition of an apocalypse, the end of one age and the total transformation of the world. Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, sometime between 1800 and 1000 BCE in ancient Persia. At the heart of Zoroastrian belief is a cosmic dualism, the ongoing battle between Ahura Mazda, the wise, good creator, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of chaos and deceit. Human beings live within this conflict and are tasked with choosing between truth, known as Asha, and falsehood, known as Druj. Unlike other ancient religions, which often view time as cyclical, Zoroastrianism sees history as linear. Time moves toward a clear end, a moment when the struggle between good and evil is resolved. That moment is called Frashokereti. It is the culmination of the divine plan, a final event in which the world will be purged of evil, the dead will rise, and existence will be made perfect. The doctrine of Frashokereti is found in later Zoroastrian writings, such as the Bundahishan, the Denkard, and the Zandai Vohuman Yasen. These texts expand on ideas first introduced in the Gathas, hymns believed to have been composed by Zoroaster himself. Though the earlier scriptures focus more on personal judgment and moral choice, later texts describe a future, collective transformation of the entire cosmos. Frashokereti is initiated by the arrival of a savior figure known as the Sashient, meaning the one who brings benefit. According to tradition, the Sashient will be miraculously born from a virgin who bathes in a sacred lake containing Zoroaster's preserved seed. He will appear at the end of time, leading the final battle against the forces of evil and ushering in a new age. Before the final renewal, all of the dead will be resurrected. This includes both the righteous and the wicked. Each person will undergo judgment, not through arbitrary punishment, but through a test of moral integrity. This event includes one of the most unique and symbolic images in apocalyptic literature, the river of molten metal. All souls must pass through it. For the righteous, it will feel like warm milk. For the wicked, it will be a painful purification. This fiery ordeal does not mark eternal condemnation, but a chance for cleansing. Zoroastrianism rejects the idea of everlasting punishment. Eventually, even the wicked will be restored to purity and truth. Following the judgment and purification of souls, the final act of Frashokereti unfolds. The physical world itself is transformed. All disease, decay, hunger, and death are eliminated. Time, as a concept, comes to an end. Human beings will live in a state of eternal, incorruptible harmony with Ahura Mazda. Evil, personified by Angra Mainyu, will be permanently destroyed or rendered powerless. This is not just the end of conflict, it is the total victory of good. In the aftermath of Frashokereti, the world is no longer what it once was. It is not merely repaired, it is made perfect. This perfected world is known in Zoroastrian tradition as an existence without decay, without death, without hunger, without thirst. The earth becomes entirely fertile, with no need for agriculture or labor. Human beings, no longer bound by pain or mortality, live in full harmony with Ahura Mazda and with one another. There is no need for governments, armies, or even language as we know it, because there is no conflict, no deception, and no division. In this vision, evil is not eternal. Angra Mainyu, the embodiment of falsehood and destruction, is ultimately eliminated, not through violence, but through the final triumph of truth. This differs sharply from dualistic systems where good and evil remain in permanent tension. Zoroastrianism anticipates a definitive resolution. Evil is not balanced with good. It is undone. Frashokereti also marks the end of linear time. With the final defeat of evil and the complete restoration of the world, time no longer progresses. The world enters an eternal, changeless state of perfection. This idea that time itself will end when the cosmic battle concludes is unique among apocalyptic systems. In most traditions, even in paradise, time continues. In Zoroastrianism, perfection means the end of movement, the end of struggle, and the end of change. Importantly, the doctrine of Frashokereti emphasizes individual responsibility. Though the final outcome is assured, good will prevail. Human beings are still expected to participate in that process. Every good thought, every kind word, and every just action contributes to the advancement of Asha, the divine truth and order. This moral participation makes Zoroastrianism an active religion, not one of waiting or withdrawal. The faithful are not simply waiting for the end. They are helping to bring it about through their choices. This theological framework has influenced other major religions, particularly during the Achaemenid and Sasanian Persian empires, when Zoroastrianism was the dominant religion of a vast and powerful civilization. During this time, Jews living under Persian rule encountered Zoroastrian teachings. Scholars believe that ideas such as resurrection, final judgment, heaven and hell, and a messianic savior figure were transmitted, or at least reinforced, during this period. These elements later became central to Second Temple Judaism, and by extension, to Christianity and Islam. The parallels are notable. The Saoshyant mirrors the concept of a Messiah or Savior figure in Abrahamic religions. The resurrection of the dead and final judgment resemble the last day in Islamic eschatology, and the resurrection of the dead in Christian and Jewish belief. The purification of souls bears a resemblance to the idea of purgatory in later Christian theology. The ultimate transformation of the world aligns with prophetic visions of a new heaven and new earth. However, Zoroastrianism's tone is often more optimistic than its counterparts. It offers no eternal damnation, no lake of fire, no enduring separation between the righteous and the wicked. Instead, it promises that every soul can be redeemed, and that even those who stray far from the path of truth can be purified and reunited with the divine. This emphasis on universal restoration sets it apart from many later apocalyptic visions. Zoroastrian texts also reflect a strong awareness of cosmic scale. The Buddhism, a Pahlavi text compiled in the 9th century CE, presents a detailed cosmology that spans not just the physical world, but time itself. It divides cosmic history into 3 parts: creation, the present struggle, and final transformation. This structured view of time as a divine project, moving toward a known conclusion, creates a sense of purpose that informs Zoroastrian ethics and daily practice. In addition to its theological richness, the concept of Frashokereti has historical and cultural significance. During the Sasanian era, 224 to 651 CE, the doctrine of cosmic renewal was closely linked to state ideology. Kings were often portrayed as defenders of Asha, the divine order, and their role was understood as part of the larger struggle against chaos. Rulers saw themselves not just as political figures, but as moral agents contributing to the unfolding divine plan. The fall of the Sasanian Empire during the Islamic conquest in the 7th century marked a turning point. Zoroastrianism lost its official status and gradually declined, especially in Persia. However, the faith survived, particularly among the Parsis of India, a community of Zoroastrians who migrated to avoid religious persecution. Today, Zoroastrian communities remain small but active in India, Iran, and diaspora populations in North America, Europe, and elsewhere. Modern Zoroastrians continue to uphold the doctrine of Frashokereti, though interpretations may vary. For some, it remains a literal future event. For others, it serves more as a spiritual metaphor for the triumph of truth over falsehood, both in the world and within the self. In either case, it remains a core part of Zoroastrian identity, a promise that despite the darkness of the present, the light of final renewal will come. As an apocalyptic vision, Frashokereti is both familiar and distinctive. It shares structural elements with other end times doctrines, a savior figure, resurrection, judgment, and a new world. But its tone is more hopeful, its scope more universal, and its ending more complete. It offers not just salvation for the few, but restoration for all. Not just the survival of the righteous, but the transformation of the entire cosmos. Frashokereti reminds us that the end does not always have to be a fall into ruin. Sometimes the end is a return to wholeness, to harmony, to the original vision of creation as it was meant to be. The Epic of Gilgamesh and Mesopotamian flood myths. The Mesopotamian flood myths, especially those found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, are among the earliest known apocalyptic traditions. These stories depict the near-total destruction of humanity through divine judgment. They feature core apocalyptic elements: a corrupted world, a chosen survivor, divine wrath, and a post-cataclysmic renewal. While they don't describe the ultimate end of all things, they mark the end of a civilization, making them foundational apocalyptic narratives. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving literary works in human history. Originating from ancient Mesopotamia, the poem was written in Akkadian using cuneiform script and preserved on clay tablets. The most complete version we have comes from the Standard Babylonian edition, compiled around the 12th century BCE by a scribe named Sinlike Unnini. The flood myth appears in Tablet 11 of the epic and is presented as a story within a story, told by a man named Utnapishtim, a mortal granted immortality after surviving a great flood sent by the gods. Utnapishtim's account echoes an even earlier tale, the Atrahasis epic, dated to around the 17th century BCE. In both stories, the gods decide to destroy humanity. In Atrahasis, the gods are disturbed by the growing population and the noise it creates. In Gilgamesh, the reason is less clear, but the act is still framed as a divine judgment. The great gods convene and choose to send a flood to wipe out all life on earth. One god, Ea, also known as Enki, disapproves of the plan and secretly warns Utnapishtim. Ea instructs him to demolish his house and use the materials to build a large boat. He gives specific measurements and construction details. The vessel should be a perfect cube, 120 cubits on each side, roughly 200 feet, sealed with pitch and bitumen. This design, though very different from the long, rectangular ark of the Hebrew Bible, serves the same purpose: survival through a total inundation of the world. Utnapishtim follows the instructions precisely. He loads the vessel with his family, craftsmen, and the seed of every living thing. Once they are aboard, he seals the door. The storm begins shortly after. The gods unleash wind, rain, and darkness upon the earth. The waters rise with such force that even the gods are frightened. The epic says they retreat to the highest heaven, cowering like dogs, and weep over the destruction they have caused. The storm lasts for 6 days and 7 nights. On the 7th day, the sea grows calm. The boat, having survived the chaos, comes to rest on Mount Nisir, a mountain of unknown modern location. Utnapishtim waits for several days, then releases a dove to test whether the land is dry. The dove returns, finding no place to rest. He tries again with a swallow, which also returns. Finally, he releases a raven, which does not return, indicating that the waters have receded. Utnapishtim disembarks and offers a sacrifice to the gods. The deities, drawn by the aroma of the offering, gather around like flies. The goddess Ishtar mourns the loss of life, expressing deep regret. The chief god, Enlil, is furious that anyone survived the flood. Ea, the god who warned Utnapishtim, responds with a rebuke. He suggests that the punishment was excessive and proposes that in the future the gods use more targeted methods to deal with human problems, like wild animals, disease, or famine, rather than global annihilation. As a reward for his obedience and survival, Utnapishtim and his wife are granted immortality and placed in a distant, unreachable realm beyond the known world. The flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh is closely related to the older Atrahasis epic, which predates it by several centuries. In Atrahasis, the gods face a dilemma. Humanity, originally created to relieve the gods of manual labor, has become too numerous and noisy. Their constant clamor disturbs the gods' rest. Enlil, the chief god, grows increasingly frustrated and sends various plagues and droughts in an attempt to reduce the population. Each time, Enki secretly warns Atrahasis, who finds a way to survive. Eventually, Enlil decides on a final solution: the flood. The parallels between Atrahasis and Gilgamesh are striking. In both stories, a wise man is warned in advance, instructed to build a large vessel, preserves life, releases birds to test the land, and offers sacrifices after the flood. These similarities suggest a long-standing flood tradition in Mesopotamian culture, passed down through oral storytelling and adapted into various written forms over time. These myths served both religious and cultural purposes. For ancient Mesopotamians living in the flood-prone Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, the concept of a catastrophic deluge was not abstract. Sudden, devastating floods could wipe out entire settlements, destroy crops, and reshape the land. These stories likely developed as a way to explain such disasters, placing them in the realm of divine will and cosmic justice. The flood myths also reflect deeper theological ideas. The gods in these stories are powerful but flawed. They are not always just, nor are they in agreement with one another. Their actions often seem impulsive, even emotional. This portrayal stands in contrast to later monotheistic depictions of a single, all-knowing deity. Still, these early myths establish important narrative patterns: divine judgment, selected survival, and the opportunity to rebuild, a structure that would echo through later religious traditions. One of the most important legacies of the Mesopotamian flood myth is its influence on the biblical story of Noah's Ark, found in the book of Genesis. The two accounts are not identical, but the similarities are substantial. In both, a righteous man is chosen to survive a divinely sent flood. Both build large sealed boats to house their families and animals. Both release birds, doves, ravens, or swallows to test the condition of the earth. And both offer sacrifices after disembarking, leading to a form of reconciliation with the divine. Scholars widely agree that the Hebrew flood story was influenced by earlier Mesopotamian traditions, especially given that much of the Hebrew Bible was written or compiled during and after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. The flood story in Gilgamesh may have served as a cultural and theological foundation, which the authors of Genesis reshaped to fit a monotheistic worldview. In the biblical version, the flood is a moral response to human wickedness. God is portrayed as grieved by human violence and corruption, but ultimately merciful, making a covenant with Noah and promising never to destroy the earth again by flood. The Mesopotamian gods, by contrast, are driven by frustration and fear, and only later regret their decision. This contrast highlights the differing theological messages, one emphasizing moral accountability and divine mercy, the other focusing on divine power and human fragility. While the biblical flood story became central to the Abrahamic religions, the Mesopotamian versions faded into obscurity for millennia. They were rediscovered in the 19th century through archaeological excavations in modern-day Iraq. Thousands of clay tablets were unearthed from ancient cities such as Nineveh and Ur, and it was in this context that scholars first translated the Epic of Gilgamesh and recognized its connection to the Book of Genesis. The discovery sparked a re-examination of ancient Near Eastern literature and its influence on the Bible. From a literary and historical perspective, the Gilgamesh and Atrahasis flood stories offer an invaluable glimpse into how ancient cultures grappled with existential fears. They illustrate how myth can be used to explain natural disasters, reinforce social values, and offer hope for survival and renewal. Even in their earliest form, these stories speak to universal human questions. Why do catastrophes happen? Who gets saved? And what comes after the end? As an apocalyptic vision, the Mesopotamian flood myths focus less on cosmic endings and more on the end of a human era. They represent a sharp break in the continuity of civilization, a divine reset that wipes the slate clean. What follows is not utopia, but simply a chance to begin again, hopefully wiser than before. Unlike the eschatologies of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, or Islam, these stories don't offer a perfected future or eternal reward. There is no resurrection, no paradise, no final victory of good over evil. Instead, the gods return to the heavens, and the surviving humans are left to rebuild on their own. The apocalypse has passed, but its scars remain. And yet, despite this somber tone, the survival of Utnapishtim, and by extension, humanity, offers a kind of hope. The flood may have destroyed the world, but it did not destroy the possibility of life. That alone gives these ancient stories their enduring power. They are, in essence, apocalypses of water, not fire or fury, but silence, submersion, and slow return. And in their quiet aftermath, we find the earliest human vision of the world ending and beginning again. Ragnarok, Norse mythology. Ragnarok is the Norse mythological vision of the apocalypse, a cataclysmic series of events that lead to the death of gods, the destruction of the world, and its eventual rebirth. Though it comes from a polytheistic tradition, it fulfills the core definition of an apocalypse: the end of an age, divine judgment through chaos, and the emergence of a new, renewed world. Ragnarok, in Norse mythology, is not a single event, but a sequence of foretold disasters. The term comes from Old Norse, commonly translated as the fate of the gods, or twilight of the gods. It is described in sources such as the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, two medieval Icelandic collections that preserve much of what we know about Norse cosmology, prophecy, and eschatology. Ragnarok begins with a series of natural and cosmic disruptions. First, the world is thrown into chaos by the onset of Fimbulwinter, a harsh and unrelenting winter that lasts for 3 successive seasons with no summer in between. Snow falls in all directions, crops fail, and humans are driven to desperation. Brothers fight brothers, and the fabric of society begins to unravel. Next comes the breaking of cosmic bonds. The great wolf Fenrir, long held in chains by the gods, breaks free. The world serpent Jormungandr, who encircles the earth beneath the sea, rises and causes massive floods. Loki, the trickster god, who had been imprisoned for his crimes, escapes and joins the forces of chaos. At the same time, the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, sets sail from the underworld, carrying the army of the giants and the dishonored dead. As the cosmic order collapses, the sky itself breaks open. The fire giant Surt, wielding a flaming sword, leads the fire beings of Muspelheim toward the battlefield of Vigrid. The gods, aware of their fates, prepare for battle. Odin, Thor, Freyr, Tyr, Heimdall, and others face their enemies in a final confrontation. Each knows that death is certain, but they fight anyway, fulfilling their destined roles. This final battle is brutal and total. Odin is swallowed whole by Fenrir. Thor manages to slay Jormungandr but dies shortly after from the serpent's venom. Freyr is killed by Surt. Heimdall and Loki kill each other in a final mutual strike. The world is consumed by fire, and Surt's flames engulf the sky and earth. Mountains collapse, stars disappear, and the land sinks beneath the sea. Yet this is not the end. After the destruction, the world slowly resurfaces. A new earth emerges from the sea, green and fertile. Surviving God's return, Balder, the beloved god who had previously died, is resurrected. 2 human survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, emerge from a hidden forest and begin to repopulate the earth. The sun, which had been devoured by a wolf, is replaced by her daughter. A new cycle begins. The myth of Ragnarok stands apart from many other apocalyptic traditions in that it offers both a violent end and the promise of renewal. Unlike doctrines that focus purely on judgment or moral reckoning, Ragnarok is deeply tied to cycles of time, nature, and fate. The Norse worldview accepted that destruction was inevitable, not because of failure or sin, but because it was woven into the fabric of the cosmos. The sources for Ragnarok come primarily from 2 13th-century Icelandic texts: the Poetic Edda, a collection of earlier Norse poems, and the Prose Edda, written by the Icelandic scholar and politician Snorri Sturluson. While both texts were written down centuries after Norse paganism had faded as an organized religion, Scholars believe they reflect earlier oral traditions passed down for generations in Scandinavia and the North Atlantic. One of the key features of Ragnarok is the concept of foretold doom. The gods are aware of their fate. Odin, the All-Father, seeks wisdom throughout his life to try and delay or prevent it. He sacrifices one of his eyes for insight and hangs himself on the world tree, Yggdrasil, in exchange for knowledge of the runes. Yet despite all his efforts, the prophecy cannot be undone. The gods march into battle knowing they will die. This fatalism, central to Norse belief, emphasizes honor and courage in the face of inevitable loss, a theme that permeated Viking society and culture. Yggdrasil itself, the world tree that connects all realms of existence, is said to shudder during Ragnarok. Though wounded, it survives the destruction, acting as a symbol of continuity and resilience. Within its shelter, the two human survivors, Lif and Lifthrisa, hide and wait out the chaos. Their emergence after the fire and flood represents the renewal of human life, fragile but enduring. The idea of cyclical destruction is present in many mythologies, but in Norse tradition, it is especially vivid. The world is not destroyed once and for all. Instead, it dies and is reborn. The sea swallows the land, and then the land rises again. Fire consumes the sky, but light returns. The gods fall, and some return. Even Balder, whose earlier death had been a harbinger of Ragnarok, is restored. This cycle suggests that even in the face of total collapse, regeneration is possible. Ragnarok also carries deep symbolic meaning. Each element of the story reflects a broader concept. Fenrir, the wolf who kills Odin, represents chaos that cannot be contained forever. Jormungandr, the serpent who encircles the world, symbolizes the boundaries of existence breaking apart. Surt, the fire giant, brings the cleansing flames that clear the way for a new world. The ship Naglfar, built from the nails of the dead, serves as a chilling reminder of the inevitability of decay and mortality. These symbols were likely understood as metaphors for the end of natural cycles, harsh winters, famines, or the decline of empires. In this way, Ragnarok functioned both as cosmic prophecy and cultural commentary. It gave meaning to suffering, framing it as part of a larger, inevitable story. It's also important to note that Ragnarok does not include universal judgment in the way many later religious apocalypses do. There is no division of souls into eternal reward or punishment. There is no resurrection of all the dead, no weighing of deeds. The focus is not on individual salvation, but on the fate of the world and the gods. This distinguishes Norse eschatology from the Abrahamic traditions and highlights its roots in a warrior culture where dying with honor mattered more than what happened afterward. While Norse paganism eventually gave way to Christianity, the myth of Ragnarok persisted. In the Christian era, some scholars and poets interpreted it through a biblical lens, comparing it to the Book of Revelation. Both involve catastrophic destruction, divine battles, and a new world that follows. However, the moral and theological foundations differ significantly. Ragnarok is not about sin or divine justice. It is about the fulfillment of fate. In modern times, Ragnarok has continued to influence literature, film, philosophy, and popular culture. It has appeared in everything from high fantasy to comic books, from operas to video games. Often, it's used as a symbol for total upheaval, followed by renewal, a narrative structure that resonates with audiences across cultures and generations. Some historians believe that Ragnarok may reflect not only cosmological beliefs, but also real historical trauma. The collapse of the Roman Empire, the migrations and wars of the early medieval period, and even extreme weather events may have influenced how northern peoples imagined the end of the world. Long winters, volcanic eruptions, and famines could easily be interpreted as signs that a final battle was approaching. Despite its dramatic imagery, Ragnarok is not a message of despair. Its final note is quiet and hopeful. After the fire and flood, the earth blooms again. The surviving gods return to a cleansed world. Humans are reborn. Light returns to the sky. The myth acknowledges the darkness, but insists on the return of dawn. As an apocalypse, Ragnarok is vivid, poetic, and deeply human. It accepts that endings are unavoidable, but it also insists that every end, no matter how violent or tragic, is also a beginning. The end of the Kali Yuga, Hinduism. In Hinduism, time is cyclical rather than linear, unfolding through a series of vast cosmic ages called yugas. The Kali Yuga, the current and final age in the cycle, is associated with spiritual decline, corruption, and disconnection from Dharma, cosmic order. Its eventual end, marked by destruction and divine intervention, will reset the cycle and usher in a new golden age. Though not an apocalypse in the Abrahamic sense, it is a cataclysmic transition, a dissolution of the world as it exists, followed by renewal. The concept of yugas comes from Hindu cosmology and is detailed in ancient scriptures such as the Puranas, the Mahabharata, and the Manusmriti. A full cycle, called a Mahayuga, consists of 4 successive ages: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Each yuga represents a gradual decline in human virtue, truth, and alignment with Dharma. The Kali Yuga, which we are said to be living in now, is the final and most degenerate phase. It is marked by strife, materialism, spiritual ignorance, and moral decay. According to tradition, this age began with the death of Krishna, around 3102 BCE, and is prophesied to last for 432,000 years. We are only a few thousand years into it, but ancient texts describe in detail the conditions that will intensify as the Kali Yuga progresses. The Vishnu Purana, one of the principal sources on the Kali Yuga, outlines its symptoms. Rulers will become tyrants, driven by greed rather than justice. Religion will be corrupted. Falsehood will be considered truth, and the wise will be silenced. Natural disasters will increase. Famine and disease will spread. Family bonds will weaken, and virtue will all but vanish. People will live shorter lives, guided by base desires rather than higher principles. This spiritual and societal breakdown is not random. It is seen as part of the cosmic cycle. Just as the seasons progress and the moon waxes and wanes, the yugas rotate through a grand process of creation, decline, dissolution, and renewal. The end of the Kali Yuga, then, is not the final end of the world, but the end of a cycle. It is an apocalyptic moment within an eternal rhythm. At the climax of the Kali Yuga, according to the Bhagavata Purana, the world will have descended into near total darkness. At this point, a divine figure will appear, Kalki, the 10th and final avatar of Vishnu. Unlike Krishna or Rama, who appear to restore Dharma during their respective ages, Kalki comes not to reform, but to cleanse. He will ride a white horse, and wield a sword of fire, cutting down the wicked and destroying what remains of the corrupt age. This destruction is not indiscriminate. It is focused on those who have abandoned Dharma entirely. In many depictions, the battlefield stretches across the earth, and the war is cosmic in scale. The elements, earth, air, fire, and water, join in the upheaval. Mountains crumble, oceans rise, and the structure of the universe itself begins to dissolve. Following the destruction brought by Kalki, Hindu tradition describes a gradual rebalancing of the cosmos. The forces of chaos and ignorance are swept away, and Dharma is restored. This marks the end of the Kali Yuga and the beginning of a new Satya Yuga, also known as the Krita Yuga, a golden age of truth, virtue, and harmony. In this age, human beings will once again live in alignment with spiritual principles. Life will be long, peaceful, and free from suffering. The cycle begins anew. Unlike linear apocalyptic framework that moved toward a final judgment and eternal destination, Hindu cosmology emphasizes eternal recurrence. There is no single end of the world, only endless cycles of creation and dissolution, called Srishti and Pralaya. Each cycle is vast in scale, spanning millions of years, and each yuga serves as a phase within that cosmic rhythm. Philosophically, the yuga system reflects a deep understanding of impermanence. Everything in the material world is subject to change. Goodness rises, then falls. Societies flourish, then decay. But none of it is final. The cycle of rebirth, known as samsara, applies not only to individuals, but to the cosmos itself. The Kali Yuga is simply one necessary stage in a vast cosmic drama. Its darkness gives meaning to the light that will follow. The figure of Kalki is particularly significant. As the final avatar of Vishnu, he represents not only destruction, but also hope for renewal. His coming signals that divine justice has not been forgotten, and that even the most corrupt age has an expiration point. Kalki's role is not to punish indiscriminately, but to clear the path for the rebirth of order. In this way, he reflects both the wrath and compassion of the divine, protecting creation by removing what endangers it. While the timing of Kalki's arrival remains far in the future according to traditional texts, the symbolism of his coming has had real-world impact. Throughout history, various Hindu reformers, mystics, and even political figures have been viewed by their followers as manifestations or forerunners of Kalki. In times of social collapse or foreign rule, belief in the eventual arrival of Kalki has offered both comfort and resistance, a sense that darkness is temporary and that cosmic order will ultimately prevail. In Hindu art and literature, the end of the Kali Yuga is often portrayed with powerful imagery. Storms rage across the earth, fires consume the sky, the oceans swell, and the heavens collapse. Yet amid this chaos, Kalki rides forth, serene, brilliant, and unshakable. He is not a savior in the Abrahamic sense, rescuing souls from sin, but a force of realignment, bringing the universe back into balance by dissolving what no longer serves its divine purpose. This apocalyptic vision also influences Hindu approaches to daily life. If one accepts that the world is currently in a period of decline, then the emphasis shifts from changing society to perfecting the self. This is reflected in the paths of yoga, meditation, and spiritual discipline. While the external world deteriorates, the internal self can still move toward moksha, or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. In this sense, the apocalypse is not only external, It is also internal, representing the destruction of ignorance within the self. Modern interpretations of the Kali Yuga vary. Some take the timeline literally, believing that we are only a few thousand years into a 432,000-year age. Others view the concept more metaphorically, as a description of spiritual conditions rather than fixed dates. In this view, the symptoms of the Kali Yuga, greed, violence, dishonesty, are seen not as cosmic inevitabilities, but as human choices that can be addressed through awareness and discipline. Still, the idea of a world caught in decline resonates deeply. In times of global crisis, environmental collapse, or moral confusion, the Kali Yuga offers a framework for understanding the darkness, not as chaos without purpose, but as a phase with an eventual conclusion. The certainty of renewal provides a kind of cosmic reassurance that even in the worst of times, the wheel of time keeps turning. The end of the Kali Yuga, then, is not a moment of despair. It is the necessary close of a chapter. The fire clears the forest, the storm resets the sky, and out of destruction comes a world reborn. As an apocalypse, the end of the Kali Yuga is vast, symbolic, and timeless. It is not about individual judgment, but about cosmic realignment. And it teaches that no matter how deep the darkness, the light will return, because the cycle must go on. The Buddhist prophecy of Maitreya, Buddhism. In Buddhism, apocalyptic imagery often centers around cycles of decline and rebirth. The prophecy of Maitreya, the future Buddha, reflects an eschatological moment, not one of fire or wrath, but of spiritual restoration after a long period of moral and societal decay. While Buddhism doesn't describe a final end of the world, the coming of Maitreya marks the end of a dark era and the beginning of a renewed golden age of enlightenment. The prophecy of Maitreya appears in various Buddhist texts, including the Cakkavatti Sutta, the Anagatavamsa, and later Mahayana and Tibetan scriptures. According to these traditions, Maitreya is a bodhisattva currently residing in the Tushita heaven, waiting for the appropriate time to descend to earth. He will be the next Buddha in the current cycle, succeeding Gautama Buddha, who lived and taught in the 6th to 5th century BCE. Maitreya's appearance is prophesied to occur far into the future, during a time when the teachings of the current Buddha, referred to as the Dharma, have been completely forgotten. This decline unfolds gradually. As generations pass, human lifespans shorten, morality deteriorates, and true spiritual understanding fades. The world falls into disarray, not necessarily through war or fire, but through forgetfulness and spiritual emptiness. In many accounts, lifespans shrink to just 10 years, and violence, greed, and ignorance become widespread. This dark era echoes the Buddhist concept of impermanence or anicca, the idea that all conditioned things are subject to change, decay, and eventual dissolution. Just as empires rise and fall, so too does Dharma fade from memory. The world is not doomed forever, but it must pass through this decline before it can be renewed. At the low point of this age, something begins to shift. According to the Cakkavatti Sutta, a new cycle begins when people, exhausted by their own suffering, start to behave with compassion once again. Lifespans slowly begin to increase. Morality improves. And when conditions are right, Maitreya will descend to earth. He will be born not into a royal or elite family, but into a world in need. His name, Maitreya, comes from the Sanskrit word Maitri, meaning loving kindness or benevolence. His arrival marks not a judgment, but a new beginning. Like previous Buddhas, he will achieve enlightenment through his own insight and effort, and then spend his life teaching others how to escape suffering. Unlike apocalyptic saviors in some traditions who arrive with fire, swords, or plagues, Maitreya's power lies in wisdom and compassion. He is described as a fully awakened being who will rediscover the Dharma and share it with a new generation of followers. He will help sentient beings attain liberation through meditation, ethical living, and awareness of the impermanent nature of existence. The prophecy of Maitreya occupies a unique place in the Buddhist imagination, not simply as a future promise, but as a reflection of the cyclical and impermanent nature of reality itself. In many ways, it is less about a single messianic figure and more about the rhythm of forgetting and remembering, of decay and renewal. In this way, Maitreya is not only the next Buddha, but the return of wisdom when all seems lost. Across the many schools of Buddhism, Maitreya's role has been interpreted in various ways. In Theravada traditions, particularly in Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, Maitreya is described as a fully awakened Buddha who will arise only when the teachings of Gautama Buddha have completely vanished from the earth. In this age of spiritual emptiness, humanity will have forgotten the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Morality will have deteriorated, and suffering will be widespread. When conditions are right, Maitreya will be born into the world, attain enlightenment on his own, and teach the Dharma anew. In Mahayana Buddhism, especially in East Asia, Maitreya takes on more accessible and devotional qualities. His name appears in temple chants, and statues of him are often placed near entrances to monasteries and shrines. He is portrayed not with solemn austerity, but with an open, welcoming expression. He represents joy, hope, and the reassurance that the Dharma will not be lost forever. In places like China, Korea, and Japan, Maitreya is sometimes seen as a figure who can be called upon even now through prayer, aspiration, and moral discipline to guide one's spiritual path and ensure rebirth in the time of his future teachings. In Tibetan Buddhism, Maitreya is not merely a distant promise, but a present reality. He is believed to reside in Tushita heaven, the realm of joy and contentment, where bodhisattvas await their final rebirths. Tibetan masters have described meditative encounters with Maitreya, often receiving inspiration or insight from him. The revered Indian scholar Asanga, in the 4th century CE, is said to have received teachings from Maitreya directly after years of devoted meditation. These teachings formed the foundation of the Yogacara school, one of Mahayana Buddhism's most influential philosophical systems. In this view, Maitreya is active even now, shaping the course of Buddhist thought and practice. But the prophecy of Maitreya has not always remained purely spiritual. In various moments of historical crisis, particularly in East Asia, the name of Maitreya has been invoked as a symbol of worldly transformation. During periods of political upheaval, famine, or foreign invasion, Buddhist reformers or revolutionary leaders have sometimes claimed to be Maitreya, or to herald his imminent arrival. In medieval China, several millenarian movements grew around the belief that Maitreya would soon descend to overthrow corrupt rulers and restore moral order. These movements combined Buddhist eschatology with political ambition, offering the hope of both spiritual and material renewal. This dual identity, both as a peaceful future Buddha and as a potential revolutionary, makes Maitreya one of the most flexible figures in religious history. He can be contemplative or militant, distant or present, purely spiritual or politically charged, depending on the needs of the community and the interpretation of the times. Despite this diversity, the central narrative remains constant. Maitreya comes not to destroy the world, but to heal it. His power lies in his ability to reconnect people with the Dharma, not through force, but through compassion, clarity, and example. Unlike apocalyptic saviors in other traditions, Maitreya's return is not framed as a divine rescue from damnation. There is no final judgment, no eternal heaven or hell, and no dramatic rapture of souls. Instead, the world returns to balance through teaching. Maitreya is not the judge. He is the guide. His arrival does not mark the end of time, but the beginning of another turning of the Dharma wheel. In this way, the Buddhist apocalypse is deeply internal. The world ends not in flame or flood, but in forgetfulness, and it is restored not through punishment, but through remembrance. When people forget the path to enlightenment, the world becomes confused, violent, and full of suffering. But when a Buddha appears, the path becomes visible once again. The darkness lifts, the teachings return. Modern interpretations of Maitreya vary widely. Some see him as a literal future teacher who will appear in an age so far away that it lies beyond our reckoning. Others view him symbolically as the potential for awakening that lives in all beings. From this perspective, Maitreya is not waiting in a distant realm, but within the mind of every person who chooses to live with compassion and wisdom. Every moment of mindfulness, every act of kindness becomes a small step toward his return. Outside of traditional Buddhism, Maitreya has also been adopted into new religious movements and global spiritual philosophies. In the 19th and 20th centuries, movements like Theosophy interpreted Maitreya as a world teacher who would appear to unite spiritual traditions and guide humanity into a new era. Though not accepted by mainstream Buddhism, these interpretations reflect the universal appeal of Maitreya's message, that ignorance and suffering are not permanent, and that wisdom and peace can be restored. Ultimately, the prophecy of Maitreya is not just about the future. It is about the ongoing nature of hope. It teaches that no age of darkness lasts forever. The Dharma may be forgotten, but it is never lost. The path may be hidden, but it will be found again. And the teacher will return, not to rule, but to remind. In the grand scope of Buddhist cosmology, where aeons stretch far beyond the scale of human lifetimes, Maitreya's arrival is a moment of cosmic breath, a gentle reset in the endless rhythm of decline and renewal. It is not a violent apocalypse. It is the quiet reappearance of truth. And in that truth, the world begins again. The Jewish Messianic Apocalypse, Judaism. In Judaism, the end of days is envisioned as a future era marked by the arrival of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, the judgment of nations, and the restoration of divine justice. While Jewish texts do not describe an end to existence itself, The Messianic age signals the end of human history as it is known, followed by a transformed world governed by peace, righteousness, and closeness to God. It is a prophetic apocalypse focused on redemption and renewal. The idea of a future messianic figure, known in Hebrew as the Mashiach, meaning anointed one, has its roots in early biblical texts, but develops more fully in later Jewish writings, particularly during the Second Temple period, roughly 516 BCE to 70 CE. While the Torah itself contains only hints of a future Redeemer, the books of the prophets, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, offer increasingly vivid visions of a coming leader who will restore Israel, bring peace to the world, and reign with justice. This expectation is not purely political, it is deeply spiritual. The Messiah is not merely a king or military figure, but someone who embodies divine purpose. In many prophetic passages, he is portrayed as a descendant of King David, chosen by God to fulfill the promises made to Israel. His arrival is associated with the ingathering of exiles, the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, the end of war, and the global recognition of God's sovereignty. During times of persecution or oppression, Messianic hope became a powerful force in Jewish life. It served as both comfort and resistance, offering the belief that suffering was temporary and that redemption was assured. In the face of exile, conquest, and destruction, Jews turned again and again to the vision of a world transformed, not by violence or conquest, but by divine justice working through a chosen leader. Some texts describe cosmic disturbances that will precede the Messianic age. The book of Daniel, for example, speaks of great suffering, tribulation, and the resurrection of the dead. In apocalyptic literature like the Dead Sea Scrolls, a final battle between the forces of light and darkness is prophesied, reflecting the growing influence of dualistic thinking during the late Second Temple period. This blend of prophetic and apocalyptic imagery shaped what became the Jewish vision of the end of days. Over time, the concept of the Messiah became more detailed and complex, particularly during the turbulent centuries surrounding the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 CE. As Jewish communities faced Roman occupation, exile, and the loss of their central place of worship, Messianic expectations intensified. Many began to long not just for political freedom, but for a complete transformation of the world, a reordering of history guided by divine justice. In these difficult periods, the idea of the Messianic age served as a powerful psychological and spiritual anchor. While interpretations varied, the core belief remained consistent, that a divinely chosen individual, descended from the line of David, would appear to restore Israel, defeat injustice, and lead the world into an era of peace. The image of the Messiah became both a symbol of hope and a mechanism for perseverance during times of persecution and despair. Rabbinic literature, developed during and after these crises, added depth to the apocalyptic vision. In many texts, the time immediately preceding the Messiah's arrival is described as a period of chaos and suffering, a stage known as the birth pangs of the Messiah. This metaphor suggests that the hardships of the present are not meaningless, but rather the labor pains of something better to come. During this time, morality would decline, truth would be obscured, and the world would seem to spiral into darkness. Yet this darkness is understood to precede the dawn of redemption. The Messiah, upon arriving, is prophesied to gather the Jewish people from around the world, re-establishing them in the land of Israel. He will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, reinstitute proper religious practice, and serve as a just ruler, not only for Israel, but as a moral guide for all nations. Many Jewish sources emphasize that under his leadership, the entire world will recognize and worship one God, ending idolatry and spiritual confusion. This vision includes the resurrection of the dead, Tekiyat Hametim, a core tenet of traditional Jewish belief, but unlike later Christian interpretations that focus on reward and punishment in the afterlife, the Jewish resurrection is primarily this worldly. The righteous are brought back to life to live in peace and holiness on a renewed earth. This renewal does not involve the destruction of the planet, but rather its transformation, a perfected version of the world we already inhabit. The Jewish apocalypse, then, is not a tale of annihilation, but one of restoration. There is no fire from heaven or eternal torment. Instead, there is healing. The brokenness of the world is repaired. Injustice is undone. Even wild nature is transformed. Predators live peacefully alongside prey, and the environment itself becomes harmonious. Prophetic texts, such as Isaiah, offer visions of a world where the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. Across history, this hope has repeatedly surfaced in times of danger and uncertainty. Numerous individuals have been viewed as possible messianic figures, some revered, others controversial. Figures like Simon Bar Kokhba, who led a rebellion against Rome in the 2nd century CE, were hailed as potential deliverers, especially when they appeared to fulfill key prophecies. Later, during the 17th century, Sabbatai Zevi captured the hopes of vast numbers of Jews across Europe and the Middle East, before his dramatic downfall shattered many expectations. These moments demonstrate how deeply the longing for messianic redemption is woven into Jewish historical consciousness. The messianic idea also had profound influence beyond Judaism. Early Christians interpreted Jesus of Nazareth as the promised Messiah, reimagining the Jewish apocalypse in new terms and blending it with Greek and Roman eschatological ideas. However, Judaism did not follow this interpretation. For most Jews, the Messiah must bring about real, measurable change in the world, peace, justice, and the rebuilding of sacred space, not merely spiritual salvation. In contemporary Judaism, views on the Messiah and the Messianic age vary widely. Orthodox Jews continue to expect the arrival of a personal Messiah. Conservative Judaism is open to both a personal Messiah and a symbolic Messianic era. Reform and Reconstructionist Jews often focus on the ethical and communal aspects, envisioning a future era of global justice and peace brought about by humanity working together, rather than waiting for a single Redeemer. Yet even in its most symbolic forms, the Jewish apocalypse retains its core message, that history has a direction, that suffering is not the final word, and that human life is moving toward reconciliation with the divine. The Messianic age, whether seen as literal or metaphorical, calls for moral responsibility, collective healing, and hope in the face of adversity. As an apocalyptic vision, the Jewish Messianic tradition stands out for its grounding in this world. Rather than urging escape from earth, it seeks to transform earth itself, to bring heaven closer to home, to repair what is broken, and to fulfill promises made long ago. It is a vision, not of the end, but of the world finally made whole. The Book of Revelation, Christianity. The Book of Revelation is the most famous apocalyptic text in Christianity. It describes the final confrontation between good and evil, the return of Christ, the judgment of the living and the dead, and the creation of a new heaven and new earth. It is a dramatic, symbolic prophecy of the end of the current world order and the beginning of eternal divine rule. The Book of Revelation, also known as the Apocalypse of John, is the final book of the New Testament. It is traditionally attributed to John of Patmos, a Christian exile who wrote the text in the late 1st century CE, during a time of persecution under the Roman Empire. Written in vivid and often cryptic imagery, Revelation weaves together visions of cosmic upheaval, divine judgment, and ultimate redemption. The text opens with a series of messages to 7 churches in Asia Minor, praising or admonishing them for their faith, conduct, and endurance. These early chapters establish the context of the Christian community's suffering and the promise of future vindication. From there, the narrative shifts into prophetic vision. John is taken up into heaven and shown a scroll sealed with 7 seals, each of which, when opened, unleashes a new stage of divine judgment upon the earth. What follows is a series of escalating catastrophes: war, famine, plague, natural disasters, and spiritual deception. These are symbolized by the famous 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, each representing conquest, war, scarcity, and death. As more seals are broken, trumpets are sounded, and bowls are poured out, each bringing new waves of destruction. The imagery is intense and often terrifying. Rivers turn to blood, stars fall from the sky, and demonic creatures emerge to torment humanity. Throughout the chaos, Revelation introduces figures who play central roles in the final drama: the beast, a symbol of oppressive earthly power; the false prophet, who deceives the nations; and Babylon the Great, depicted as a harlot riding a scarlet beast, representing a corrupt civilization destined for destruction. These characters are judged and overthrown in a great cosmic battle between the forces of God and evil. As the visions in Revelation unfold, the narrative builds toward a dramatic climax. After the symbolic judgments are complete and the great empires of evil are cast down, the text describes the return of Christ, portrayed as a rider on a white horse. His name is called Faithful and True. He wears many crowns, and from his mouth comes a sharp sword, with which he strikes down the nations. This figure is not gentle or hidden, but triumphant, arriving as a divine warrior to defeat the enemies of God and bring justice to a corrupted world. This moment, often referred to as the Second Coming, marks the beginning of the millennial kingdom, a 1,000-year reign of peace in which Christ rules alongside his saints. During this time, Satan is bound and cast into a bottomless pit, unable to deceive the nations. This period is described only briefly in the text, yet it has inspired centuries of theological interpretation, debate, and expectation. Some traditions take the millennium literally, while others interpret it symbolically as a spiritual age of righteousness. After the 1,000 years, Satan is released for a short time, leading to a final confrontation. But his rebellion is swiftly crushed. Fire comes down from heaven, and the devil is cast into a lake of fire, along with the beast and the false prophet, where they are said to remain forever. With evil now fully defeated, the stage is set for the Last Judgment. This judgment scene is one of the most enduring images in Christian eschatology. The dead, great and small, stand before a great white throne. Books are opened, symbolizing the divine record of each person's deeds, and another book is opened, called the Book of Life. Those whose names are not found in the Book of Life are cast into the lake of fire. Those who are judged righteous are welcomed into eternal life. This moment is not only about punishment, it is about the unveiling of ultimate truth. In the Christian tradition, judgment is not arbitrary. It is the final moment of clarity when all actions, hidden thoughts and intentions are brought to light. For believers, it is the fulfillment of God's promise to set all things right. For others, it marks the end of separation from divine justice. But perhaps the most powerful image in Revelation is what follows. The arrival of the new heaven and new earth. The old order, the world of sorrow, suffering and death, passes away. In its place, a new reality emerges. The New Jerusalem, described in rich detail, descends from heaven like a bride adorned for her husband. It is a radiant city with gates of pearl and streets of gold. There is no temple there, for God dwells among the people directly. There is no more night, no more pain, no more tears. The river of life flows from the throne of God, and the tree of life grows on its banks, bearing fruit for the healing of the nations. This vision is deeply symbolic, yet it conveys a clear and powerful message. The story ends not in destruction, but in renewal. The apocalypse is not the final collapse, but the path to restoration. Evil is not equal to good. It is defeated and removed. The faithful are not lost. They are brought into eternal communion with the divine. Throughout Christian history, Revelation has inspired awe, fear, devotion, and controversy. Its cryptic language and vivid symbols have been interpreted in countless ways. Some read it as a prediction of historical events or future catastrophes. Others see it as a timeless allegory of spiritual struggle. Still others view it as a coded message of hope for persecuted believers under Roman rule, urging them to remain faithful in the face of suffering. In the Middle Ages, Revelation fueled dramatic visions of the end times and the battle between Christendom and its enemies. During the Protestant Reformation, reformers often interpreted the beast and Babylon as symbols of corrupt religious institutions. In modern times, Revelation has inspired everything from novels and films to political movements and spiritual awakenings. Yet at its heart, Revelation is a pastoral text, a message to struggling communities that evil does not have the final word. It tells a story of perseverance, justice, and ultimate restoration. Its message is not only for the future, but for every generation that longs for a world made whole. As an apocalyptic vision, the Book of Revelation brings together the full range of Christian theology: divine sovereignty, human responsibility, judgment, mercy, and the promise of new creation. It is a book of endings, but also of beginnings, a closing of one world and the birth of another. The Day of Judgment, Yawm al-Qiyāmah, Islam. In Islam, the apocalypse is known as Yawm al-Qiyāmah, or the Day of Resurrection. It is a central event in Islamic belief, marking the end of the world the resurrection of all souls, divine judgment, and the eternal division between paradise and hell. This is not symbolic or cyclical. It is the singular, definitive end of the current world and the beginning of the eternal hereafter. The Day of Judgment is mentioned extensively throughout the Quran and the Hadith, the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. It is one of the core tenets of Islamic faith. Belief in this final day is considered essential, alongside belief in God, the prophets, divine books, angels, and destiny. The Quran paints a vivid imagery of this event. It describes the moment the trumpet is blown by the angel Israfil, signaling the end of all life. The mountains will crumble into dust, the seas will boil over, the sun will be darkened, and the sky will split open. Everything that exists will cease, except for God. Then, after a period known only to God, the trumpet will sound a second time, and all souls will be resurrected. People will rise from their graves and gather on a vast plain for judgment. This moment is known as the gathering, or al-Hashr. Every individual will stand before God, barefoot and alone, their deeds laid bare. Each person's life will be weighed on a divine scale, the Mizan. Their book of deeds, Kitab al-Amal, will be presented, recording every action, word, and intention. Even the smallest acts, both good and bad, will be counted. Nothing is forgotten. The Quran emphasizes justice. God does not wrong anyone, and all judgment will be fair and exact. Those whose good deeds outweigh their bad will be granted entry into Jannah, or paradise. Those whose evil deeds prevail will be condemned to Jahannam, or hell. But this division is not always permanent. In some interpretations, punishment in hell can be temporary for some believers, depending on the gravity of their sins and the mercy of God. The Day of Judgment does not arrive suddenly. Islamic teachings describe a series of major and minor signs that will precede the final hour. These signs are found throughout Hadith literature and offer a gradual unfolding of cosmic and moral disorder. They serve not as predictions with fixed dates, but as warnings, designed to awaken moral awareness and spiritual preparation. Among the minor signs are events that reflect widespread societal decline, dishonesty becoming common, trust being lost, wealth being hoarded, people abandoning prayer, leaders acting unjustly, and modesty disappearing from public life. These signs suggest a moral unraveling long before the physical end arrives. Some scholars interpret them symbolically, while others see them as literal future events. Then come the major signs, which are more dramatic and supernatural in nature. These include the appearance of the Dajjal, or false Messiah, a one-eyed deceiver who will lead many astray with miracles and promises of power. His rule will bring immense suffering and confusion. Opposing him is the awaited Mahdi, a guided leader descended from the Prophet Muhammad, who will rise to restore justice and protect the faithful. Another key figure in the Islamic apocalypse is Isa ibn Maryam, or Jesus, who holds a unique role in Islamic belief. Though distinct from the Christian view of Jesus, Islam teaches that he was a true prophet, born of the Virgin Mary, and taken up by God. In the final days, Jesus will return, not as a new messenger, but to fulfill the mission that was left unfinished. He will defeat the Dajjal, break the cross, symbolically rejecting claims of his divinity, and bring unity among believers. Following these events, the trumpet will be blown by the angel Israfil. The world as we know it will end. The sun will be folded up. The stars will scatter. Pregnant camels will be left untended. and the beasts of the wild will flee. These descriptions found in powerful surahs like Al-Takwir, Al-Infitar, and Al-Zalzala convey a universe coming undone, a vast cosmic reckoning that strips away illusion and reveals eternal truth. Then comes the resurrection, known as Al-Ba'th. From every grave and dust of the earth, humans will be reformed and awakened. They will stand on the plane of judgment, frightened, exposed, and awaiting their fate. God alone will judge. There is no intercessor without his permission. Deeds will be weighed. The tongue, hands, and even skin may testify. The Quran describes this moment as a day when wealth and children will not avail, except for those who come to God with a sound heart. The bridge over hellfire, called the Sirat, must be crossed by every soul. It is said to be thinner than a hair and sharper than a sword. The righteous will cross it with ease, some as swiftly as lightning. Others will stumble, fall, or be seized. Below, the fires of Jahannam roar, a place of justice, not cruelty. In many interpretations, sinners who believed in God but failed in righteousness may eventually be purified and released, while persistent deniers face a more lasting punishment. Paradise, or Jannah, is described in vibrant detail. It is a place of peace, joy, gardens, rivers of milk and honey, and eternal nearness to God. There is no pain, no death, no sorrow. The faithful are welcomed with greetings of peace and dwell in bliss, reunited with loved ones and surrounded by divine beauty. The greatest reward, however, is the vision of God, a closeness that transcends physical description. The Quran emphasizes that this final judgment is rooted in divine mercy and justice. God is described as Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, and Al-Adl, the most just. Even a grain's weight of good is not overlooked, yet the balance is precise. None are wronged, and no injustice occurs. Throughout Islamic history, the concept of Yawm al-Qiyāmah has served as a powerful ethical compass. It reminds believers that this life is a test, temporary and filled with choices. Every act matters. The awareness of an impending judgment encourages humility, honesty, compassion, and accountability. It deters injustice and motivates charity. Even those who seem forgotten or oppressed in this world are promised fairness on that day. This apocalyptic vision is not meant to inspire fear alone. It also provides hope. For the oppressed, it is a promise that no tyranny is eternal. For the repentant, it is a reminder that God's door remains open. And for the faithful, it is the assurance of a world to come, a place where truth reigns, pain ends, and the soul finds its eternal home. In Islamic thought, the apocalypse is not the collapse of meaning. It is the unveiling of meaning. The term itself, Qiyāmah, means rising, a resurrection, a standing up, an awakening. It is the moment when illusions fall away and the reality of every soul is made clear. As with other Abrahamic traditions, the Islamic Day of Judgment marks the end of history and the beginning of eternity. It reminds humanity of what truly lasts, and invites each person to prepare not by fearing the end, but by living with purpose before it arrives. The Aztec Fifth Sun Apocalypse. Aztec Mythology. In Aztec mythology, the world exists in cycles called suns, each representing a complete era of creation and destruction. The current world, known as the fifth sun, is believed to be temporary. destined to end through a catastrophic apocalypse. This world view places humanity within a fragile balance, where divine forces sustain reality but can also tear it apart. The Aztecs, like earlier Mesoamerican cultures, held a deeply cyclical understanding of time. According to their mythology, the gods created and destroyed 4 previous worlds, or suns, each brought to an end by elemental forces: jaguars, wind, fire, and flood. These weren't symbolic endings. They were total collapses, with each destruction wiping out all life before the gods began again. The Aztecs believed they lived under the 5th sun, a world born through sacrifice and destined to end by earthquakes. This belief was central to their religion, culture, and daily life. To delay or possibly prevent the destruction of this 5th sun, the gods required constant offerings of human blood and hearts, a concept often misunderstood by later observers, but rooted in the idea that cosmic balance required nourishment. The myth of the 5th sun is told in texts like the Codex Chimalpopoca and later Spanish accounts based on Aztec oral traditions. According to these sources, the current era began after the gods gathered at Teotihuacan, a sacred city that predated the Aztecs. There, the gods sought to create a new sun to bring light to the world. 2 deities volunteered: Tecuhtlicatl, proud and wealthy, and Nanahuatzin, humble and covered in sores. When the time came, Tecuhtlicatl hesitated. Nanahuatzin leapt into the flames without fear, becoming the new sun. Ashamed, Tecuhtlicatl followed, becoming the moon. But even this great sacrifice was not enough. The new sun would not move without further blood. The gods themselves offered their lives, tearing out their own hearts to set the sun in motion. From that moment on, the cycle of cosmic debt was born, a contract between gods and humans, where continual sacrifice kept the world turning. The myth of the 5 suns does more than explain the origin of the cosmos. It defines the Aztec understanding of existence. Each previous sun was destroyed in its own unique way. The first sun ended when jaguars devoured humanity. The second sun was swept away by hurricanes. The third sun ended in a rain of fire. The fourth sun was consumed by floods. Now, the 5th sun, the age in which the Aztecs believed they lived, will one day collapse through massive earthquakes, toppling mountains and tearing the earth apart. This apocalyptic expectation was not a distant event to be pondered or feared from afar. It was immediate. It infused every aspect of life. The sun itself, though present and powerful, was believed to be constantly dying. Its journey across the sky, a daily struggle that required nourishment through sacrifice. Without that nourishment, the sun would falter, and the age would end prematurely. This belief shaped Aztec religion at every level. Daily rituals were designed to honor and sustain the gods. Large-scale ceremonies often involved offerings of animals, precious objects, and, in some cases, human lives. While the practice of human sacrifice is controversial and often sensationalized, to the Aztecs, it was a sacred act, an essential exchange that mirrored the god's own original sacrifice at Teotihuacan. Victims were often captives taken in ritual warfare known as flower wars, battles fought not to conquer territory, but to obtain sacrificial offerings for the gods. These captives were treated with solemn respect, fed and cared for in the days leading up to the ceremony, and seen not as victims, but as vital participants in the cosmic cycle. Their role, though tragic, was understood as necessary to the preservation of the world. In the temple complexes of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, priests would conduct ceremonies atop great pyramids. The most sacred was the Templo Mayor, where sacrifices were offered to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, was central to the apocalyptic mythology. His struggle to cross the sky each day mirrored the eternal fight against darkness and chaos. Without offerings, his power would fail, and the fifth sun would fall. The Aztecs also believed that time itself moved in repeating cycles of 52 years, a sacred bundle of years called a calendar round. At the end of each cycle, they feared that the sun might not rise again. During this period, all fires were extinguished. The people waited in darkness, fasting, praying, and offering sacrifices. Only when the priest successfully rekindled the sacred flame at the top of a mountain, an event known as the New Fire Ceremony, would life resume, and the people rejoice in the continuation of the fifth sun. This apocalyptic anxiety was not rooted in despair, but in responsibility. The Aztecs saw themselves as caretakers of the cosmos, entrusted with maintaining balance between creation and destruction. The gods had given their lives to create the world. It was now humanity's duty to uphold it, however heavy the burden. Interestingly, this sense of cosmic fragility made the Aztecs especially attuned to omens and signs. Records from the time of the Spanish arrival in the early 16th century describe a series of strange events: fire in the sky, mysterious voices, and temples struck by lightning. Many interpreted these as signs that the fifth sun was nearing its end. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived wielding unfamiliar weapons and foreign gods, some Aztecs believed that the end had indeed begun. The fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521, following the conquest by Hernán Cortés and his allies, was seen by many as the fulfillment of the apocalyptic prophecy. The temples were destroyed, the old gods silenced, and the fifth sun, metaphorically at least, was extinguished. Whether literal or symbolic, the belief that the world had reached the end of a cosmic age echoed deeply throughout Mesoamerica. As an apocalyptic vision, the Aztec fifth sun is both ancient and intensely human. It reflects a worldview in which life is fragile, the cosmos is sacred, and the balance between chaos and order is constantly negotiated. The fear of collapse was not paranoia, it was reverence. It inspired awe, sacrifice, art, and ritual. It reminded the people that every sunrise was a gift, bought with devotion and vigilance. Today, much of what we know about the Aztec apocalypse comes from a combination of codices, oral tradition, and Spanish accounts, many of which were written through the lens of conquest and colonization. Yet even through that distortion, the core message remains that the world we know is temporary, that its survival depends on our relationship with the divine, and that every civilization lives under the shadow of its own fifth sun. The Mayan calendar and 2012 prophecy. Maya civilization. The 2012 prophecy associated with the Maya civilization is often misunderstood as a doomsday prediction. In truth, the Maya did not foresee the end of the world in 2012. Instead, their calendar marked the completion of a major time cycle, a cosmic reset, not an apocalypse in the destructive sense. Still, The myth that 2012 would bring a catastrophic end reflects how ancient systems of timekeeping can be interpreted as apocalyptic by modern cultures. The ancient Maya were expert astronomers and mathematicians who developed one of the most advanced calendar systems in the ancient world. Among their various calendars, the most significant for long-term cycles was the long count calendar, which tracked vast spans of time and cosmic history. It begins with a mythical creation date, corresponding to August 11th, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar, and progresses in units called baktuns, each representing approximately 394 years. According to this system, the 13th baktun ended on December 21st, 2012. This date, noted in inscriptions such as those found at Tortuguero Monument 6, marked the end of a cycle and the beginning of the next. While it was an important calendrical milestone, there is no evidence in surviving Maya texts that they believed this date would bring cataclysm or destruction. Still, the number 13 held spiritual significance for the Maya, and the completion of 13 baktuns may have been seen as the close of a great cosmic age. The idea that something would end, something profound if not destructive, was real within their worldview. In Maya cosmology, time is not linear but cyclical, with great periods of order and disorder rotating endlessly. This understanding naturally lends itself to the interpretation of certain dates as moments of transformation. However, the popular idea that the Maya predicted the literal end of the world in 2012 was largely a modern misinterpretation, fueled by media, films, and pseudo-archaeological speculation. To truly understand the 2012 prophecy, it's important to appreciate the Maya view of time. Time was not just a means of measuring days, it was sacred. The Maya believed time had a spiritual structure, composed of repeating cycles, each with its own character, deities, and influence over human life. Their calendar system was deeply interwoven with mythology, astronomy, and agriculture, guiding everything from planting seasons to religious ceremonies. The long count calendar was created to track the passage of time from the beginning of the current cosmic era, the creation of the present world. It did so using nested units of time, kin days, Winal 20 days, Tun 360 days, Katun 7,200 days, and Baktun 144,000 days. 13 Baktuns formed a grand cycle, lasting approximately 5,125 years. The end of the 13th Baktun, reached on December 21st, 2012, was not a prediction of doom. It was the completion of one full cycle and the beginning of another. In Maya inscriptions, such as those found at Tortuguero in Mexico, the 2012 date is referenced with minimal drama. The monument briefly notes that a deity, possibly Bolon Yokte Ku, a god associated with change in the underworld, would appear or be involved in some ceremonial event. There is no mention of global destruction, natural disasters, or the end of humanity. In fact, many Maya scholars suggest that the date would have been seen as a time of celebration or reflection, a moment to honor the turning of a cosmic page. So where did the idea of an apocalyptic 2012 come from? In the late 20th century, the 2012 date attracted interest from New Age thinkers, speculative writers, and later, mass media. Authors like José Arguez and Terence McKenna linked the Maya calendar to ideas of spiritual evolution global consciousness shifts, and even extraterrestrial influence. These ideas, while imaginative, were far removed from historical Maya beliefs. As the actual date approached, pop culture exploded with theories and predictions, many claiming that the world would end in earthquakes, solar flares, or planetary alignments. The release of the blockbuster film 2012 in 2009 cemented the idea in the public imagination. It portrayed a cinematic apocalypse filled with collapsing cities, giant tidal waves, and desperate efforts to preserve human civilization. Though wildly inaccurate, it helped turn the Maya calendar into one of the most famous modern doomsday myths. Interestingly, some people embrace the 2012 date not as an end, but as a beginning, a chance for humanity to undergo a spiritual awakening, to shed old systems of greed and violence, and to step into a new era of harmony and awareness. While these ideas had little to do with Maya theology, they reflected a deeper human yearning for change and renewal, a theme that lies at the heart of many apocalyptic traditions. For the Maya themselves, both ancient and modern, the 2012 phenomenon was met with mixed feelings. Indigenous communities in Mexico and Central America often saw it as a misrepresentation of their heritage. Some leaders and scholars used the global attention as an opportunity to educate the world about Maya culture, correcting misconceptions and emphasizing that their civilization was far from dead. Others simply continued living by the rhythms of the Harb and Tzolk'in calendars, focused more on the present than on any imagined end. It's also worth noting that the Maya calendar doesn't end with the 13th Baktun. It continues, just as our own calendar rolls over from December 31st to January 1st. The Maya long count moves forward into a 14th Baktun and beyond. Time goes on. The world, in their view, was not set to end, but to renew. The fascination with the 2012 prophecy teaches us something important. Even in our modern, scientifically advanced world, people are still drawn to the idea of cycles, of endings and new beginnings. Ancient calendars like the Maya long count offer a powerful lens through which to explore that need, not as a prediction of catastrophe, but as a reflection of how we seek meaning in the flow of time. As an apocalypse, the 2012 myth was largely a modern invention, but the spiritual heartbeat behind it, the desire to understand time, change, and the fragility of the world, is very real. The Maya, in their wisdom, left behind more than a date. They left a cosmic perspective, one that reminds us that endings are rarely final, and that the sun, like the calendar, always rises again. The Hopi Prophecies, Native American Spirituality. The Hopi Prophecies describe a vision of the end of the current world and the coming of a new one, making them a distinctly apocalyptic tradition within Native American spirituality. These teachings do not describe a literal destruction of the earth, but rather a spiritual and societal collapse brought on by disharmony with nature, greed, and the abandonment of sacred ways. What follows is not extinction, but renewal, if balance is restored. The Hopi people, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cultures in North America, have passed down their prophecies orally for generations. These teachings are deeply rooted in their relationship with the land, the cycles of nature, and the sacred covenant they believe they made with the Creator. At the center of their prophecy is the concept of worlds. According to Hopi belief, humanity has already lived through 3 previous worlds, each destroyed due to human misconduct, and we are now living in the 4th world, which is nearing its end. The transition from one world to the next is never smooth. It is always marked by suffering, catastrophe, and cleansing. In the past, these transitions came through fire, floods, and upheaval. The end of the 4th world, they warn, will come not only through natural disaster, but also through moral decay and spiritual disconnection. One of the most well-known aspects of Hopi prophecy involves the arrival of a purification time. This is a period of chaos and global imbalance, when the earth is polluted, resources are exploited, and humanity turns away from sacred teachings. During this time, climate patterns become unstable, animals disappear, and society becomes filled with conflict and confusion. These conditions, the Hopi say, are the signs that we are nearing the end of the 4th world. Central to the Hopi vision of the world's end is the appearance of specific spiritual signs, both earthly and celestial, that will precede the Great Transition. One of the most famous and widely discussed is the prophecy of the blue Kachina and red Kachina, spiritual messengers said to appear in the sky when the world nears its point of purification. According to some interpretations passed down through elders and storytellers, the blue Kachina is a harbinger. It will be seen in the heavens, possibly as a star, comet, or other unusual celestial event. Its appearance will signal that the great changes have begun. Shortly after, the red Kachina, sometimes described as a fiery figure or a cleansing force, will follow. When the red Kachina dances in the plaza, it is said, the purification will be complete and the old world will end. The precise meaning of these signs is often debated, and it's important to note that not all Hopi sources agree on the details. The prophecies were traditionally kept within the Hopi communities and passed on through oral tradition, not through widely distributed written records. This has allowed for flexibility and reinterpretation over time, but also means that much of what is known comes through a mixture of elder testimony, public storytelling, and sometimes speculative retellings by outsiders. What remains consistent, however, is the central message. The end will not come unexpectedly. The earth gives warnings. The animals act differently. The weather changes. Society begins to unravel. These are not punishments from above, but signs that humans have lost their balance, a concept at the heart of Hopi spirituality. For the Hopi, balance is not only ecological, but spiritual. It involves living in harmony with the land, honoring sacred cycles, respecting elders, and following the moral and ceremonial instructions given by the Creator. When people live out of alignment with this sacred path, chasing power, wealth, and destruction, they contribute to the destabilization of the world. But the prophecy is not without hope. In fact, the Hopi message is deeply transformational. After the time of purification, whether it comes through natural disasters, social collapse, or spiritual reckoning, a new world will emerge. The 5th world. This new age will be born only if humanity returns to humility, respect, and sacred responsibility. The survivors will be those who live in harmony with nature, who remain faithful to the old teachings, and who refuse to give in to fear, violence, or corruption. In this sense, the Hopi apocalypse is not about annihilation, It's about renewal through cleansing. Much like a forest that must burn for new growth to emerge, the current age must pass away for a better one to take its place. The process is painful, but necessary. The Hopi do not see the end of the Fourth World as a catastrophe to avoid, but as a turning point to prepare for with awareness, humility, and reverence. One of the most profound elements of the Hopi prophecy is its universality. While rooted in Hopi tradition, the teachings speak to a global human condition, the destruction of the earth, the disconnection from sacred traditions, the erosion of community values. These are issues felt across cultures, across continents. The Hopi do not claim that only their people will be affected or saved. Instead, they offer a message for all of humanity. We are at a crossroads, and each person must choose which path to walk. In recent decades, some Hopi elders have chosen to share parts of their prophecy with the outside world, not to predict exact dates or catastrophes, but to offer guidance. They warn of the danger of forgetting who we are, of allowing technology and greed to rule our lives, and of ignoring the warnings of the earth itself. But they also remind us that the future is not fixed. It is shaped by our actions, by how we live today. As an apocalyptic tradition, the Hopi prophecy is strikingly gentle yet firm, poetic yet direct. It does not rely on divine wrath or dramatic battle. It calls for introspection, spiritual clarity, and collective responsibility. The apocalypse, in their telling, is already unfolding, not through fire from the sky, but through the choices humanity makes every day. And yet, beyond the warnings lies a quiet promise. If we return to balance, if we care for the earth, honor our elders, and walk in humility, the fifth world can be beautiful. It can be a world of peace, cooperation, and sacred alignment. The prophecy does not guarantee survival, but it offers a path toward it, a path that begins not with fear, but with remembering. The Ghost Dance Movement and the End of the World. Native American, 19th century. The Ghost Dance was a spiritual movement among Native American tribes in the late 19th century, rooted in a powerful apocalyptic vision. It promised that the world as it was, dominated by colonial violence and cultural erasure, would come to an end. The dead would rise, the suffering would cease, and indigenous ways of life would be restored. Though deeply spiritual and peaceful in practice, the movement was seen as a threat by US authorities and ended in tragedy. The movement was born in 1889 when a northern Paiute prophet named Wovoka had a vision during a solar eclipse. According to his account, he was taken to a spirit world where he met the Creator. There, he was told that if native peoples lived in peace, followed traditional customs, and performed a specific ritual dance, a great transformation would occur. The world would be renewed. The white colonizers would vanish. The buffalo would return in great herds. Ancestors would rise from the dead, and harmony would be restored. Wovoka's message spread rapidly across the western United States, reaching tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others. Each group interpreted the prophecy in its own cultural context, but the central idea remained: the current world, filled with suffering and displacement, would come to a sacred end, not through violence, but through spiritual practice, ritual, and a return to indigenous ways. The heart of this movement was the ghost dance, a ceremonial circle dance performed for hours, sometimes days, in rhythmic repetition. Dancers would enter trance-like states, receiving visions of the coming transformation. The dance became not only a spiritual tool, but also a powerful expression of identity, grief, and resistance. For many, it was a final act of hope in the face of cultural extinction. As the ghost dance spread, it became more than a ritual. It became a symbol of spiritual resistance. For many native communities devastated by U.S. expansion, broken treaties, disease, starvation, and forced relocation, the dance was a final expression of hope. It provided a way to process grief, to remember a sacred world that had been nearly lost, and to imagine a future where that world might be restored. However, to the US government and military officials, the movement was viewed with suspicion. Misunderstanding its spiritual purpose, many interpreted the ghost dance as a sign of impending rebellion. This fear was especially pronounced among settlers and government agents near Lakota territories, where the dance took on particularly urgent and apocalyptic meaning. Among the Lakota, the prophecy was embraced as a powerful vision of liberation. Some believed that wearing ghost dance shirts, special garments often decorated with symbolic imagery, would protect them from bullets when the final confrontation came. These beliefs, although spiritual in nature, were interpreted by authorities as signs of militant uprising. Tensions reached a breaking point in December of 1890, when the US government sent troops to disarm a band of Lakota at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. The atmosphere was tense, and during the process of disarmament, a shot was fired, its origin still debated. What followed was a massacre. Over 150 Lakota men, women, and children were killed, many while fleeing. The snow-covered ground turned red. It was a devastating and bloody conclusion to a movement that had preached peace and renewal. The massacre at Wounded Knee effectively ended the ghost dance movement, at least outwardly. The US government banned the dance and increased efforts to suppress native religions and cultural practices. Many survivors were forced into silence, and Wovoka himself urged an end to the dance out of fear for his people's safety. Yet the spirit of the ghost dance did not die. In native memory and spiritual tradition, the dance remains a sacred symbol, a vision of a world healed from centuries of injustice. For some, it is seen as a delayed prophecy, a transformation yet to come. For others, it is a reminder of the resilience and dignity of those who refused to surrender their faith in the face of overwhelming loss. Modern descendants of ghost dance participants still honor the legacy of their ancestors. In some communities, the dance has been revived, not as a prophecy of coming destruction, but as an act of remembrance, connection, and healing. The hope that fueled the ghost dance, that the earth can be renewed, that injustice is not the final word, still lives on. As an apocalyptic tradition, the ghost dance is marked not by divine wrath or cosmic fire, but by longing, for a return to balance, for reconnection with ancestors, for the restoration of land, language, and spirit. It is a deeply human apocalypse, born from sorrow and sustained by vision. It reminds us that for those who have suffered displacement, genocide, and cultural erasure, the end of the world is not a far-off idea. It has already happened. The apocalypse came in the form of colonization, and the ghost dance was a way to call forth a different future from its ashes. in the quiet rhythm of the circle, in the stomping feet and outstretched arms of dancers praying for a new world. The ghost dance told a story that still resonates, a story of pain and prophecy, a story of the earth in mourning, and a story of hope that even now refuses to be silenced. Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, Christian-influenced Chinese movement. The Taiping Rebellion was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history and was fueled by an apocalyptic belief in the imminent end of the corrupt world and the coming of a heavenly kingdom on earth. Though rooted in Chinese tradition, it was deeply influenced by Christian millenarian ideas. Its leader, Aum Shinrikyo, declared himself the brother of Jesus Christ and envisioned a new divine era that would replace the Qing dynasty and cleanse the world of evil. The story begins in the early 19th century, during a time of deep instability in Qing dynasty China. The country was facing political corruption, famine, social unrest, and the growing influence of Western powers. Amid this environment, a failed civil service candidate named Aum Shinrikyo experienced a series of vivid visions following a nervous breakdown. In these visions, he claimed to have ascended to heaven and spoken with celestial beings. He later interpreted these experiences through Christian tracts that had been distributed by missionaries in southern China. From these revelations, Aum came to believe that he was the younger brother of Jesus, sent to earth to prepare the way for a new divine kingdom. He saw the Qing rulers as demons and the current world as hopelessly corrupt. The only solution, he believed, was to destroy the old world and build a new one in its place, a heavenly kingdom of great peace, or Taiping Tianguo. Aum gathered a devoted following, many of whom were disillusioned peasants, marginalized ethnic groups, and those suffering under heavy taxation. The movement quickly transformed from a spiritual revival into a revolutionary military force. With religious fervor and promises of justice, the Taiping army seized vast swaths of territory, including the city of Nanjing, which they renamed the Heavenly Capital. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was not just a political rebellion. It was a full-scale apocalyptic revolution. At its core was a belief that the existing world order was doomed, and that a new, divinely guided era was about to emerge. Aum Shinrikyo's theology merged traditional Chinese ideas of cosmic harmony with radical reinterpretations of Christianity. He claimed direct authority from God and declared himself the heavenly king, ruling as the spiritual and political leader of this coming kingdom on earth. The doctrines of the Taiping combined millenarian zeal with strict moral codes. Followers were expected to live pure lives. Alcohol, opium, gambling, and prostitution were banned. Men and women were segregated even within families. Idolatry and ancestor worship, central to traditional Chinese religion, were outlawed. Instead, the worship of a single Christian-style god became mandatory. The Bible was rewritten in a Taiping version, with changes to reinforce Aum's role as a divine intermediary. The movement's vision was sweeping. It wasn't simply about replacing one dynasty with another. It was about replacing an entire world. The Taiping declared that they were living in the final days of a corrupt age. The Qing dynasty, in their eyes, represented satanic evil. their overthrow was not just political, it was part of a cosmic battle between light and darkness. This apocalyptic fervor gave the Taiping army extraordinary drive. It was not uncommon for soldiers and followers to believe they were participating in a holy war that would usher in heaven on earth. Their cause, they believed, was inevitable, ordained by God. This belief helped sustain them through early victories, as they captured city after city and built an alternative government across large portions of southern and central China. At its peak, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom controlled nearly 30 million people, with its capital in Nanjing, serving as the heart of the new divine order. A complex bureaucracy was established, modeled on biblical ideals and ruled through Hong's appointed officials, many of whom were known as kings. Laws were enforced harshly and dissent was crushed. As the movement expanded, internal purges and leadership disputes began to arise, further straining the regime. Despite its spiritual rhetoric, the Taiping Rebellion quickly became one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Between 1850 and 1864, an estimated 20 to 30 million people died from warfare, famine and disease, more than the combined death toll of World War I. Cities were besieged and destroyed. Entire regions were depopulated. Civilians were caught in the crossfire of brutal battles between Taiping forces and Qing imperial armies. The Qing dynasty, initially slow to respond, eventually coordinated a massive counter-offensive. With the help of regional militias and Western-trained forces, including figures like Charles Gordon, the Qing gradually retook territory. After years of relentless warfare, the Taiping capital at Nanjing fell in 1864. Hong Xiuquan died shortly before the final siege, either from illness, starvation, or suicide, depending on the account. With the fall of Nanjing, the dream of the heavenly kingdom collapsed. Its leaders were executed or scattered. The Qing reclaimed its authority, but China was left deeply scarred. Millions were dead. Infrastructure was destroyed. Famine and disease followed in the rebellion's wake. The rebellion's promise of paradise had ended in apocalyptic devastation, a tragic irony for a movement that had claimed to be building heaven on earth. And yet, the legacy of the Taiping movement is not easily dismissed. In the years that followed, it became a symbol of religious zealotry, revolutionary passion, and the dangers of theocratic rule. Some historians see it as a precursor to later Chinese revolutions. Others view it as a cautionary tale about what happens when spiritual belief is fused too tightly with political power. From an apocalyptic perspective, the Taiping Rebellion stands out for its intensity, scale, and conviction. It did not predict the end of the world through divine intervention alone. It sought to create that end by force. For Hong and his followers, the apocalypse was not something to wait for. It was something to ignite. They saw themselves not as victims of a doomed world, but as agents of transformation, chosen to dismantle one civilization and build another. The movement remains one of the most striking examples of how religious visions, especially those involving the end of days, can move beyond prophecy and into action, reshaping societies in their wake. The heavenly kingdom never came, but the memory of its attempt continues to haunt Chinese history. In the end, the Taiping apocalypse was not a cleansing fire from the heavens, but a human one, lit by belief, fueled by desperation, and fanned into a storm of unimaginable suffering. It reminds us that when visions of paradise become absolute, the road to hell can be paved with holy intentions. Millerism and the Great Disappointment. 19th-century Christianity. Millerism was a Christian apocalyptic movement that arose in the United States during the early 1800s. It was based on a specific prediction that Jesus Christ would return to earth and initiate the final judgment in the year 1844. When this event did not occur, it became known as the Great Disappointment, a moment of profound spiritual crisis that gave birth to new religious movements and reshaped American Christianity. It is a defining example of a failed apocalypse, where the end was eagerly awaited but never arrived. The movement was founded by William Miller, a farmer and lay preacher from upstate New York. A veteran of the War of 1812, Miller experienced a religious conversion and became intensely devoted to Bible study. He focused on the prophetic books of Daniel and Revelation, especially the verse in Daniel 8:14, "Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Using a method of biblical numerology common among prophecy interpreters of the time, Miller concluded that these days symbolized years, and that the 2,300-year prophecy began in 457 BCE, with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Counting forward, he predicted that the cleansing of the sanctuary, interpreted as the second coming of Christ, would occur around 1843 or 1844. Miller's message spread rapidly through printed tracts, revival meetings, and traveling preachers. Thousands across the northeastern United States, and eventually beyond, embraced the belief that the end of the world was imminent. Followers known as Millerites gave up their possessions, closed businesses, and prepared for Christ's return. Some gathered on hilltops or in fields, dressed in white robes, watching the sky for signs. When October 22nd, 1844, the final date Miller had endorsed, came and went without incident, the movement faced a devastating collapse. Many believers were heartbroken, confused, and publicly mocked. It was the end of the world, but not in the way they had expected. The emotional toll of the Great Disappointment was immense. Thousands of faithful believers had invested not only their time and resources, but their deepest hopes into the prophecy. Many had endured public ridicule, sold their property, and faced rejection by family and neighbors in anticipation of the second coming. When nothing happened on October 22nd, 1844, the silence was deafening. There were no signs in the heavens, no angels, no trumpet blasts, only the cold reality of another morning. Some believers wept openly, others locked themselves indoors for days. The movement that had once swelled with anticipation now fractured beneath the weight of sorrow and confusion. Some abandoned their faith entirely, feeling deceived or foolish. Others returned quietly to their former churches, but for many, the disappointment did not extinguish their belief. It simply transformed it. In the days and months that followed, a number of Millerites began to re-evaluate what had gone wrong. They believed the date had been correct, but that the event had been misunderstood. Rather than Christ returning visibly to earth, some proposed that the prophecy referred to a heavenly event, specifically Christ's entry into a new phase of ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. This reinterpretation gave rise to what became known as the investigative judgment doctrine. Out of this reinterpretation, a new movement gradually emerged, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Founded formally in the 1860s, the Adventist faith retained much of the Millerite apocalyptic expectation, but placed a renewed emphasis on preparation, health reform, education, and ongoing prophecy. One of its most influential figures, Ellen G. White, claimed to receive visions that helped guide the direction of the church, reinforcing the belief that the world was still living in its final days. The Great Disappointment also helped shape a broader religious landscape in America. It was part of the larger Second Great Awakening, a time of fervent revivalism, social reform, and religious experimentation. Though Millerism failed in its original prediction, its influence helped give rise to a number of Adventist, Restorationist, and holiness movements that would flourish across the United States in the years to come. But the psychological and theological shock of 1844 left a deeper imprint. For many believers, it was their first encounter with what might be called a spiritual apocalypse, a moment when faith met silence and certainty dissolved into mystery. It forced them to grapple with disappointment not just as a failed event, but as a spiritual trial. Some theologians later described it as a kind of refining fire, a painful but necessary reckoning that tested the sincerity and endurance of belief. From an apocalyptic standpoint, Millerism represents a unique kind of end-time narrative, one that failed to materialize in the external world, but deeply transformed the inner world of its followers. The date passed, the skies remained still, and the earth turned as always. But for many, something truly had ended. A world view, a promise, a sense of nearness to divine resolution. And yet, from those ashes rose something lasting. The movement showed that apocalyptic expectation is never only about prediction. It is about longing. Longing for justice, for peace, for the return of something sacred in a world that often feels fractured. The Millerites were mocked for looking skyward, but their story is not just one of error. It is one of devotion, of hope pressed to its limits, and of a search for meaning in the unknown. Today, the legacy of the Great Disappointment continues in subtle ways. The Adventist Church remains a global religious community with millions of members who still believe in the soon return of Christ. But even outside that tradition, the Millerite story echoes every time a group awaits the end of the world, every time prophecy meets uncertainty, and every time faith confronts delay. As an apocalyptic moment, Millerism reminds us that not all ends arrive with thunder and fire. Some arrive quietly as a realization. A new chapter begins not when the heavens open, but when the heart must decide what to believe in the silence. Jehovah's Witnesses' End Times Predictions. Jehovah's Witnesses, a Christian denomination founded in the late 19th century, are known for their detailed and ongoing apocalyptic expectations. Unlike many one-time doomsday predictions, their view of the end times has evolved over decades, shaped by dates, reinterpretations, and a consistent belief that humanity now lives in the last days. For Jehovah's Witnesses, the apocalypse is not merely an event to come. It is already unfolding. The origins of these beliefs can be traced to Charles Taze Russell, the founder of what would become the Bible student movement. the precursor to Jehovah's Witnesses. Influenced by Adventist thinking after the Great Disappointment of 1844, Russell began publishing interpretations of biblical prophecy in the 1870s. He focused heavily on books like Daniel and Revelation, and like William Miller before him, he used biblical chronology to calculate the timing of the end. Russell concluded that Christ had returned invisibly in 1874, initiating a spiritual presence rather than a physical arrival. He believed that 1914 would mark the end of the gentle times, a period during which human governments held sway, and that God's kingdom would begin to assert its rule on earth. When 1914 arrived, World War I broke out, which many Bible students saw as a sign that prophecy was being fulfilled. Although Christ did not appear in the clouds and the world did not end, 1914 became a cornerstone of Jehovah's Witness theology. It was reinterpreted as the beginning of the last days, a period of global distress, moral decline, and divine judgment that would culminate in the Battle of Armageddon, the final confrontation between God's kingdom and the forces of evil. Over time, further dates were predicted, including 1925, 1975, and others, each accompanied by heightened expectation. While these dates passed without apocalyptic fulfillment, the belief in an imminent end remained central to the faith. Despite repeated prophetic dates that came and went, Jehovah's Witnesses did not abandon their apocalyptic outlook. Instead, their theology evolved. Each failed prediction was reinterpreted, folded into a broader narrative that maintained the urgency of the times. The year 1914, though once tied to expectations of Armageddon, was reframed as the beginning of Christ's heavenly rule, a spiritual reign that would continue until the final judgment was unleashed on earth. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that we are now living in a period called the last days, a time of increasing moral decay, political instability, natural disasters, and global suffering, all interpreted as signs foretold in Scripture. Passages from the Gospels, such as those in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, are seen as descriptions of modern-day conditions. The wars of the 20th and 21st centuries, famines, pandemics, and societal unrest are not random. They are birth pangs that signal the approach of the end. At the heart of their eschatology is the belief in a coming Armageddon, not just a symbolic battle, but a real and decisive event. In this vision, God, through Christ, will destroy all human governments and wicked systems, cleansing the earth of corruption and false religion. This war will not be fought by human hands, but by divine power. Only those deemed righteous, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, and those aligned with God's truth, will survive. Following Armageddon, Jehovah's Witnesses expect a worldwide resurrection. Billions of people who have died throughout history will be brought back to life on earth. But unlike traditional Christian visions of heaven and hell, Witnesses believe that the righteous will live forever on a paradise earth, a restored, peaceful world free from suffering, aging, and death. This promise is a cornerstone of their faith and a major theme in their literature and public ministry. Only a limited number, 144,000 anointed individuals, are believed to go to heaven, where they will rule with Christ as kings and priests. The vast majority of faithful people will live eternally on earth. The dead who are resurrected will be given the opportunity to learn about Jehovah and prove themselves worthy of everlasting life during a millennial reign, a 1,000-year period of restoration and testing. This deeply held apocalyptic vision profoundly shapes the daily life and identity of Jehovah's Witnesses. Evangelism, or what they call the ministry, is not simply a religious duty. It is a life-saving mission. Their door-to-door preaching and distribution of literature, like The Watchtower and Awake. Magazines are driven by the belief that people must hear the message of God's kingdom before the end comes. Time is seen as short. The world is passing away. Every conversation could be a person's final chance to survive Armageddon. This worldview also influences personal decisions. Jehovah's Witnesses refrain from political involvement, military service, or nationalistic ceremonies like saluting flags or singing anthems, believing that allegiance belongs solely to God's kingdom. They avoid celebrations like Christmas and birthdays, which they consider rooted in paganism or unrelated to biblical teaching. Their ethics emphasize simplicity, modesty, and separation from what they see as a morally decaying world. Critics often point to the repeated date setting as evidence of flawed prophecy. But within the faith, these moments are seen not as failures, but as tests of endurance. Proof that God's people must remain alert and faithful, even when expectations are not met. The community is encouraged to focus not on exact dates, but on the signs of the times, and to live each day as if the end could come tomorrow. From an apocalyptic perspective, Jehovah's Witnesses represent a unique case of sustained expectation. Unlike many groups that dissolve after failed predictions, they have institutionalized anticipation. The end of the world is not a distant fear. It is a living reality, always just over the horizon. This constant state of readiness provides both meaning and structure, uniting members in a shared purpose and worldview. While the dates may shift, the message remains the same. The current world is temporary, flawed, and nearing its conclusion. A better world, under divine rule, awaits. For Jehovah's Witnesses, the apocalypse is not about fire and terror. It is about hope. Hope for justice, hope for peace, hope for a future where death itself is undone. Their vision is not one of escape to heaven, but of renewal on earth. And in that vision, the end is not truly the end, but the beginning of something far greater, where paradise lost becomes paradise restored. Seventh-day Adventist visions of the end. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, which emerged from the ashes of the Millerite movement and the Great Disappointment of 1844, carries forward a vivid and detailed apocalyptic vision. While it rejects the setting of specific dates, it holds firmly to the belief that humanity is living in the final stages of Earth's history. The return of Jesus Christ is seen as imminent, literal and visible, followed by a final judgment and a complete transformation of the world. Founded formally in the 1860s, the Seventh-day Adventist Church grew from a group of believers who reinterpreted the events of 1844. Rather than viewing it as a failed prophecy, they came to believe that Christ had entered a new phase of heavenly ministry in the most holy place of the celestial sanctuary. This marked the beginning of what Adventists call the investigative judgment. a divine process in which the lives of all believers are reviewed before Christ returns. Adventists teach that the world is now in a probationary period, during which every person's character and choices are being weighed. When that judgment is complete, Christ will return visibly and gloriously to rescue the righteous, raise the dead, and destroy the wicked. The second coming is not symbolic. It is the climactic moment of history, a supernatural event that brings the current world order to an end. This belief shapes nearly every aspect of Adventist theology and lifestyle. Followers are encouraged to live with constant spiritual readiness, avoiding distractions and maintaining a life of purity, health, and service. The Sabbath, observed from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, is seen not only as a commandment, but as a sign of loyalty to God, especially significant in the events leading up to the final conflict between good and evil. For Seventh-day Adventists, the second coming of Christ is not a metaphor or vague spiritual promise. It is a literal and visible return, the climax of Earth's history. Jesus is expected to appear in the clouds, accompanied by angels, to gather the righteous dead and living, transforming them into immortal beings and taking them to heaven. The wicked, by contrast, will be slain by the brightness of his coming. This is followed by a unique feature of Adventist eschatology, the millennium, a 1,000-year reign of peace during which the earth remains desolate. According to this belief, Satan will be bound on earth, with no living humans to tempt, symbolizing his total isolation. During this time, the redeemed are believed to dwell in heaven with Christ, reviewing the records of judgment, a process that vindicates God's justice and transparency before the final phase of judgment. At the end of the millennium, the wicked are resurrected for the final great white throne judgment described in Revelation. After this, they face eternal destruction, what Adventists refer to as annihilation, not eternal torment. In this view, hell is not a place of endless suffering, but a moment of permanent non-existence. Then God creates a new heavens and a new earth, where the redeemed will live forever in perfect harmony, free from pain, sin, and death. Prophecy plays a central role in Adventist end-time understanding. One of the key books studied is Revelation, alongside Daniel. Adventists interpret much of Revelation symbolically, identifying historical powers and religious systems that align with the prophetic beasts and images described in the text. A central concept is the rise of a global crisis that will test human allegiance, particularly through the issue of worship. According to Adventist teaching, the mark of the beast represents a future system of enforced worship contrary to God's commandments. This is closely tied to Sunday observance. Adventists believe that, in the final crisis, a global decree will mandate Sunday as the official day of worship, in opposition to the biblical Sabbath. Those who remain faithful to Sabbath keeping will face persecution, while those who conform will receive the mark. This isn't about casual church attendance, but about a symbolic conflict over authority, obedience, and loyalty to God's law. At the center of this end-time scenario is a cosmic conflict, often referred to as the Great Controversy, a term coined by Ellen G. White, one of the movement's founding figures. White, who claimed to receive divine visions, remains an influential voice within the Church. Her writings describe an ongoing war between Christ and Satan, a war not just for power, but for the allegiance of every human soul. This battle is reflected on earth through choices, beliefs, and systems of worship. Far from being fear-driven, however, the Adventist apocalyptic message is rooted in hope and healing. The ultimate goal is not destruction, but restoration. God's plan is not to rescue a few and abandon the rest. It is to redeem the earth itself, to bring creation back to its intended glory. The final scenes of their prophetic story are filled with light. Families reunited, the curse of sin broken, and a new world where love and joy are eternal. This vision shapes the Adventist lifestyle in practical ways. Health is emphasized. Many are vegetarian or vegan, avoid harmful substances, and support a balanced, disciplined life. Education is highly valued. Adventists operate thousands of schools, hospitals, and humanitarian programs worldwide. Their worship is simple and centered on Scripture, with a focus on preparing for Christ's return, not through panic, but through purpose. They also maintain a strong global missionary presence, believing that the gospel message and warning of the end times must be shared with every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, as described in Revelation 14. Their message includes a call to fear God and give Him glory, for the hour of His judgment has come. This isn't a threat, it's an invitation, an appeal to live with meaning in a time of urgency. From an apocalyptic perspective, Seventh-day Adventism offers a structured, hopeful vision of the end. Unlike some movements that focus on destruction or escape, Adventists emphasize preparation, health, service, and trust. They see themselves as watchmen, sounding the trumpet, living the message, and looking not for an escape from earth, but a transformation of it. Their faith reminds us that apocalypse doesn't always mean ruin. Sometimes it means unveiling, a revelation of truth, a call to accountability, and a promise that the world, though broken, is not beyond redemption. Branch Davidians and the Final Battle, modern apocalyptic sect. The Branch Davidians were a breakaway religious sect rooted in Seventh-day Adventism, whose apocalyptic beliefs led to one of the most infamous and tragic standoffs in American history. Their leader, David Koresh, preached that the final battle of Armageddon was imminent, and that his followers were the chosen faithful preparing for it. This prophecy, shaped by interpretations of Revelation, ended in a real-world confrontation that blurred the line between spiritual warfare and modern disaster. The origins of the Branch Davidians trace back to the Davidian movement, a splinter group formed in the 1930s from within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This group believed the mainstream church had grown spiritually corrupt and that divine judgment was near. Over time, the Davidians themselves splintered again, giving rise to the Branch Davidians, who established a community outside Waco, Texas, at a compound they called Mount Carmel. In the 1980s, a charismatic and troubled man named Vernon Howell rose to prominence within the group. He would later change his name to David Koresh, claiming to be the final prophet and the Lamb of Revelation, a messianic figure destined to open the seven seals and lead the faithful into the final days. Koresh taught that the apocalypse would begin with a violent confrontation between his followers and the forces of Babylon, represented by earthly governments and institutions. Koresh's theology was deeply rooted in the book of Revelation, He taught that the world was entering its final stages and that only those who lived under his guidance would be saved. He interpreted the 7 seals as coded messages about modern events and positioned himself at the center of God's plan. His teachings combined biblical symbolism, militaristic preparation, and absolute loyalty to his authority. Under David Koresh's leadership, the Branch Davidian compound at Mount Carmel became a tightly controlled spiritual community structured around intense daily Bible study and preparation for the end times. Koresh's followers believed he had a unique ability to interpret the deepest mysteries of Scripture, especially the 7 seals of the Book of Revelation. To them, he was not just a teacher, he was the key to salvation, chosen by God to reveal truths hidden for generations. Koresh taught that the apocalypse would unfold through a final confrontation between his faithful remnant and the oppressive forces of a fallen world. The US government, media, and secular institutions were all cast in the role of Babylon, the harlot and beast described in Revelation. The faithful would suffer for a time, just as the early Christians had, but in the end, they would be vindicated by divine justice. For many inside Mount Carmel, the growing tension with authorities only confirmed the truth of their leader's prophecy. In February of 1993, those tensions exploded into reality. Acting on allegations of illegal weapons stockpiling and reports of child abuse, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, ATF, attempted to serve a search warrant on the compound. A gunfight erupted, leaving several people dead on both sides. What followed was a 51-day siege, drawing national attention and bringing in the FBI. Inside the compound, Koresh continued preaching. He interpreted the siege itself as the beginning of the final battle foretold in Scripture. He refused to surrender, stating that he was waiting for a message from God. His followers, armed and prepared, remained loyal. Some believed they were already in the throes of the Great Tribulation. Food grew scarce. Conditions worsened. But for the Branch Davidians, this suffering had spiritual meaning. They were walking the path of martyrs. The FBI, under immense pressure, used aggressive psychological tactics to force a surrender. Loudspeakers, spotlights, and cutting off utilities. Negotiations rose and fell. On April 19, 1993, federal agents launched a final assault using armored vehicles to breach the walls and insert tear gas. Hours later, the compound caught fire under disputed circumstances. Flames engulfed Mount Carmel. 76 people died, including 25 children and Koresh himself. The Waco siege, as it came to be known, shocked the world. For some, it was a tragic example of religious extremism. For others, it was a cautionary tale of government overreach. But for those inside Mount Carmel, it was the final act in a prophecy they believed had already been written. The fire to them was not defeat, it was ascension, a passage into the next world, the end of one age and the beginning of another. In the years that followed, investigators and scholars examined the group's beliefs more carefully. What became clear was that the Branch Davidians did not see themselves as suicidal. They believed they were preparing for a divine rescue, a cosmic war between heaven and earth that would validate their suffering. Their apocalypse was not metaphorical. It was something they expected to live through and survive with God's intervention. But instead of a heavenly deliverance, what came was death. From an apocalyptic perspective, The Branch Davidian story is deeply sobering. It reveals the power of charismatic leadership, the dangers of isolation, and the volatile mix of prophecy and fear. But it also shows the human longing to understand suffering, to find meaning in chaos, and to believe that somewhere beyond the pain, a final justice awaits. In the ashes of Mount Carmel, many saw only tragedy, but in the eyes of the faithful who perished, they were entering into prophecy, walking through fire quite literally, toward the end they had been promised. Whether misguided or not, their conviction was complete. Their apocalypse, unlike most, arrived not as myth or metaphor, but in smoke, flame, and silence. Aum Shinrikyo and the Doomsday Prophecy, Japan. Aum Shinrikyo was a Japanese religious cult that combined Buddhist and Hindu beliefs with Christian apocalyptic ideas and science fiction elements. It is one of the most chilling examples of a movement that not only predicted the end of the world, but actively attempted to bring it about. Its leader, Shoko Asahara, preached that global catastrophe was imminent and that only his followers would survive the final judgment. The group's actions would lead to one of the most infamous terrorist attacks in modern history. Aum Shinrikyo, which translates to Supreme Truth, was founded in the 1980s by Shoko Asahara, a partially blind yoga teacher who claimed to have achieved enlightenment and supernatural powers. Initially, the group attracted educated followers with its mix of spiritual teachings, meditative practices, and promises of personal awakening. But over time, Asahara's teachings took a darker turn. He declared himself the final avatar, combining characteristics of the Hindu god Shiva, the Buddha, and even Jesus Christ. According to his prophecy, the world was headed for a global Armageddon, brought on by materialism, sin, and international conflict, especially nuclear war. He claimed that only those who joined his movement and submitted to his authority would survive the coming destruction and inherit the earth. Asahara taught that the United States and other world powers were tools of evil, and that Japan would be the battleground for a final purification. He described visions of earthquakes, plagues, and nuclear fallout. The apocalypse, he said, would not be averted. It was inevitable. All that mattered now was preparing spiritually and physically for the aftermath. Those outside the group were doomed. What began as a spiritual movement soon became a militarized cult, with members stockpiling weapons, training in chemical warfare, and constructing laboratories to produce deadly substances. Asahara's prophecy of the end began to take shape, not through divine revelation, but through human engineering. As Aum Shinrikyo grew, so did its ambition and its paranoia. The group established compounds, bought land, and built elaborate facilities to manufacture chemical and biological weapons, including sarin gas, VX nerve agent, and even attempted to cultivate anthrax and botulinum toxin. Members were no longer merely preparing for Armageddon. They were actively planning how to initiate it. Shoko Asahara taught that suffering and death were necessary for spiritual advancement, especially if they brought a soul closer to enlightenment. This twisted belief justified murder. He claimed that killing someone outside the faith particularly someone impeding the divine mission, could actually be an act of salvation. Through this ideology, the line between prophecy and terrorism vanished. The most devastating manifestation of this belief came on March 20th, 1995, when Aum Shinrikyo carried out a coordinated attack on the Tokyo subway system. During the morning rush hour, cult members boarded several trains and released liquid sarin gas, a highly toxic nerve agent, using punctured bags wrapped in newspaper. The gas vaporized and spread silently through the crowded subway cars. 13 people died. Over 1,000 were injured. Many experienced long-term neurological damage. The attack threw the nation into chaos. At first, the cause was unclear. There were no explosions, no typical signs of an attack, just confusion, convulsions, and collapse. As emergency crews rushed in, some themselves became poisoned. Fear gripped Tokyo. People wondered if this was the beginning of the war Asahara had predicted. Within days, authorities traced the attack to Aum Shinrikyo. Raids uncovered stockpiles of weapons, chemicals, and documents outlining plans for even more ambitious atrocities. Asahara was arrested, along with many top leaders. The trial that followed revealed not only the logistics of the attack, but the deep apocalyptic theology that had driven it. Asahara believed he was destined to trigger the end of the world. His teachings, recorded in writings and videos, show a complex belief system rooted in despair, a vision of humanity as hopelessly corrupt, with salvation available only to a select few who followed his exact path. The Tokyo subway attack was not just a strike against the public, it was an attempt to fulfill prophecy. By creating chaos, Asahara believed he was purifying the earth for the chosen to rebuild. The psychological manipulation used within the cult was intense. Members were subjected to sleep deprivation, extreme fasting, physical punishment, and indoctrination sessions. Dissenters and defectors were punished or killed. Over time, critical thinking was eroded. Many genuinely believed that participating in murder and terrorism was a spiritual duty, that the world outside was doomed, and only through Asahara could they survive what was to come. The aftermath of the Tokyo attack left Japan shaken. The idea that a doomsday cult had developed advanced chemical weapons and executed a mass casualty attack in the heart of one of the world's safest countries was almost unthinkable. Yet it had happened, not in fiction, but in reality. The apocalypse, long feared as an abstract prophecy, had briefly manifested in the most tangible way, as man-made destruction rooted in spiritual delusion. In the years following the attack, Aum Shinrikyo was officially banned and labeled a terrorist organization. Its remnants splintered into smaller groups, some rebranded, others dissolved. Asahara was tried, convicted, and eventually executed in 2018. But the scars remain. Survivors continue to live with the effects of nerve gas exposure. Families mourn loved ones lost. And Japan, as a nation, remembers the day prophecy turned into terror. From an apocalyptic perspective, Aum Shinrikyo represents one of the darkest expressions of millenarian belief. It was a faith that lost its grounding in hope and instead embraced annihilation. Where most traditions speak of renewal, rebirth, or divine justice, Asahara's version of the end offered only destruction and fear. He preached salvation, but practiced death. And yet, even in this grim tale, there are lessons about the vulnerability of the human mind, about the power of charisma, about the danger of isolating theology from compassion. Aum Shinrikyo teaches us that apocalypse is not always a distant myth. It can be engineered, cultivated, and unleashed by those who believe they are chosen. In the end, the cult's prophecy did not come to pass. The world did not end. The heavens did not fall. But the lives lost, the pain inflicted, and the fear endured were real. For those touched by the attack, the apocalypse was not in the future. It had already arrived. In a silent cloud, in a crowded train, in the name of false salvation. New Age Ascension and Galactic Apocalypse Prophecies. The New Age movement offers a very different kind of apocalypse, less focused on destruction and more on transformation. In these teachings, the end of the world is not about fire or judgment, but about a profound shift in consciousness, often guided by cosmic forces or higher dimensional beings. This vision of the end marks not a collapse, but an ascension, a move from one vibrational state to another, as humanity evolves into a higher spiritual form. Emerging in the late 20th century, the New Age movement is not a single religion, but a broad spiritual current drawing from Eastern philosophy, Western mysticism, esoteric science, astrology, and channeled teachings. It often blends ancient wisdom with modern metaphysics, imagining the universe as alive with energy, vibration, and multidimensional intelligence. A central idea in many New Age apocalyptic frameworks is that Earth is undergoing a transition from the third dimension to the fifth dimension, a realm of unity, peace, and expanded awareness. This shift, sometimes called ascension, is seen as part of a cosmic schedule, a moment when humanity must evolve or fall behind. Some believe that those who are spiritually prepared will be activated or awakened and rise into this new state of being, while others will remain in lower densities, still bound by fear, ego, and materialism. Predictions about this shift have often been tied to celestial events, planetary alignments, solar flares, or the end of long cosmic cycles, such as the Mayan calendar's 2012 milestone. Many believed this would trigger a mass awakening, a thinning of the veil between dimensions, or a wave of cosmic energy that would lift the planet and its people into a new vibrational frequency. Unlike traditional doomsday prophecies, these visions do not speak of global collapse through wrath or punishment, but through a spiritual upgrade, a final test of human consciousness on a galactic scale. Many of the more detailed New Age apocalypse scenarios come from channeled messages, communications believed to come from spiritual masters, extraterrestrial beings, or higher dimensional entities. These messages often describe Earth as a planet in crisis, undergoing a necessary purification before it can join a larger galactic community. Humanity, they say, is standing at the threshold of awakening or extinction, not through war or catastrophe, but through a choice of vibration. One of the most influential sources for this worldview is the Law of One, a series of channeled teachings attributed to an entity named Ra. According to this material, Earth is approaching the end of a 75,000-year cycle, at which point souls are harvested based on their spiritual alignment. Those who live in love and service to others are said to move into fourth density consciousness, a more unified and enlightened state of existence. Those still centered on selfishness or fear may reincarnate on other planets more suited to their growth, or remain in a third density Earth until they are ready. Similar ideas are found in Theosophy, Pleiadian channeling, and works by authors like Barbara Marciniak and David Wilcock, who speak of solar events, DNA activation, and light body transformation. In these narratives, Earth is being bathed in cosmic energy, waves of light from the center of the galaxy or from distant star systems, meant to trigger a global ascension. Physical changes in the body, intense dreams, and emotional turbulence are seen as symptoms of this energetic recalibration. Sometimes these beliefs intersect with more traditional apocalyptic fears. Climate change, technological overreach, and global instability are interpreted not just as physical problems, but as symptoms of a civilization out of alignment with the universal rhythm. The apocalypse, then, becomes a kind of correction, not punishment, but necessary rebalancing. As Earth raises its vibration, anything out of sync will naturally fall away. Another common motif is the role of benevolent extraterrestrials. These beings, often described as ancient guardians or cosmic siblings, are said to be watching over Earth, intervening subtly when needed, and preparing to assist humanity through its transition. Some New Age groups speak of a galactic reset, a moment when alien contact will no longer be hidden, and the truth about Earth's spiritual origins will be revealed. In this view, the apocalypse is not just a planetary event, but part of a much larger interstellar drama. The 3 waves of volunteers theory, popularized by psychic Dolores Cannon, offers another twist on this theme. She claimed that souls from more advanced worlds have incarnated on Earth to help guide humanity through the shift. These souls, often feeling alien or out of place, are said to carry the frequency of the new Earth within them, living beacons of a higher consciousness. Despite its lack of centralized doctrine, the New Age apocalyptic vision remains remarkably cohesive. It sees the universe as a living, conscious system, moving through cycles of awakening. The current age, often called the Age of Pisces, is viewed as a time of illusion, division, and ego. The New Age, the Age of Aquarius, is expected to bring clarity, unity, and heart-centered awareness. The transition between the two is the apocalypse, not an end, but an unveiling. Of course, these beliefs are often met with skepticism. Critics point to failed dates, pseudoscience, and the blending of unverified spiritual claims with misunderstood physics. But for many who follow these teachings, the appeal lies not in prediction, but in hope. The hope that the suffering of the world has purpose, that something better awaits, and that we are not alone in the universe. And that hope, even when expressed through metaphysical language, reflects a universal longing, the desire for renewal, for a future in which fear and separation dissolve, and the world becomes something lighter, kinder, and more whole. As an apocalyptic tradition, New Age ascension teachings stand apart for their tone and vision. There are no beasts, no final judgment, no divine wrath. There is only energy, transformation, and the invitation to rise if we are willing. The end, in this telling, is not the closing of the book, but the turning of a page, a gentle evolution into something beyond our current imagination. Christian rapture and tribulation beliefs, evangelical movements. In modern evangelical Christianity, especially in the United States, one of the most influential and widely discussed apocalyptic ideas is the rapture. The belief that Jesus Christ will suddenly remove believers from the earth before a time of great suffering known as the tribulation. This theology paints a vivid picture of a two-stage end-time event. First, the secret and sudden removal of the faithful, and second, a dramatic period of judgment, global chaos, and final reckoning. Though the idea of the end of the world and the return of Christ has always been part of Christian teaching, the specific concept of the pre-tribulation rapture emerged in the early 19th century. It gained widespread popularity through the teachings of John Nelson Darby, a British theologian, and later through annotated Bibles like the Scofield Reference Bible, which helped embed the doctrine in American religious consciousness. According to this view, Jesus will return in two phases. First, in an event described as the rapture, he will appear in the air, not visibly to the world, but spiritually, to gather his followers. The dead in Christ will rise first, followed by those who are still alive, who will be transformed and caught up to meet him. This is often referenced from 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17, which speaks of the faithful being caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. After the rapture, the earth is left to face a 7-year period of tribulation, a time of immense suffering, natural disasters, war, and the rise of the Antichrist, a charismatic world leader who deceives the nations. This tribulation is seen as a final testing ground, a prelude to Christ's ultimate return to earth, known as the Second Coming, when he will establish a literal millennial kingdom and reign for 1,000 years. For believers in this theology, the rapture is not just an event. It is a promise of escape from the worst horrors of the end times. Following the rapture, the earth is plunged into a period known as the tribulation, typically described as lasting 7 years and divided into 2 halves. During this time, the world descends into chaos. According to this prophetic framework, outlined in books like Daniel and Revelation, the tribulation will include war, famine, disease, earthquakes, and widespread persecution. Natural disasters and supernatural judgments, often symbolized by the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls, bring devastation upon a rebellious world. At the center of this narrative is the rise of the Antichrist, a powerful political and spiritual figure who offers peace but ultimately reveals himself as a deceiver. He is said to form a one-world government, institute a global economy, and demand worship, enforcing loyalty through a mark, commonly interpreted by many as the mark of the beast. Those who refuse to accept this mark are excluded from commerce and subjected to persecution. The second half of the tribulation is often referred to as the Great Tribulation, a time of unparalleled suffering. During this phase, divine judgments intensify, culminating in a final confrontation between the forces of evil and Christ himself. This ultimate battle is known as Armageddon, a term taken from Revelation 16:16, referring to the location of the final showdown between the armies of earth and the returning king. At the height of this conflict, Jesus returns physically, not just in spirit, but in glory. This event, the Second Coming, is marked by cosmic signs: the sun darkened, stars falling, and heaven opening. Christ descends, defeats the Antichrist, and establishes his millennial kingdom ruling over a renewed earth for 1,000 years of peace and righteousness. After this millennial reign, there is said to be one final rebellion, the Last Judgment, and the creation of a new heaven and a new earth. This entire framework, rapture, tribulation, second coming, millennium, forms the basis of what is known as premillennial dispensationalism. While not all Christians subscribe to this view, it has become especially popular in evangelical and fundamentalist circles, particularly in North America. For many, it offers a clear, sequential map of end-time events, combining scripture, prophecy, and contemporary global developments. The rapture theology gained immense popularity in the 20th century through books, movies, and televangelism. The Left Behind book series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, published in the 1990s and early 2000s, brought the doctrine to mainstream audiences. The novels depict the rapture, followed by the chaos of the tribulation, through fictional characters navigating the rise of the Antichrist. The series sold tens of millions of copies, spawning films and conversations around prophecy in popular culture. For believers, the message is both urgent and comforting. The world may be darkening, but deliverance is near. The rapture is viewed as God's mercy, a rescue from what is to come. Evangelicals who embrace this theology often feel called to spread the gospel quickly, believing that time is running out. This urgency influences missions, political views, and cultural attitudes, especially around the state of Israel, which is seen by many as a key player in end-time prophecy. Critics argue that this view can lead to passivity, waiting for divine intervention instead of addressing earthly problems, or worse, a welcoming of global conflict as evidence of prophecy being fulfilled. But for many faithful, the focus is not on predicting dates or delighting in destruction, but on remaining faithful, living righteously, and watching the signs with open hearts. From an apocalyptic perspective, the rapture and tribulation beliefs reflect a longing for justice, deliverance, and divine order in a chaotic world. They offer believers a role in a grand cosmic narrative, watchmen on the wall, awaiting the return of their king. Unlike some apocalyptic visions, this is not a metaphor. For those who hold these beliefs, it is the literal future. The skies will part, the trumpet will sound, and everything will change. You've just listened to 21 visions of the end, from ancient prophecies to modern revelations, from sacred scripture to strange and unexpected movements. Each one imagined a world about to fall, and something new rising in its place. Some of these stories are respected and revered. Others are dismissed, even feared. And yet, when placed side by side, they begin to feel strangely familiar. Patterns emerge: a fallen world, a chosen few, a final reckoning. It makes you wonder, why are we so drawn to the idea of the end? Why do these stories appear in so many places, across so many centuries? What we believe often depends on where and when we were born. And if that's true, how can we ever be sure we've chosen the right story? Maybe there are no answers, only questions worth asking. Thank you for spending this time with the Sleeping Through History channel. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. We'd love to know which of these apocalyptic stories stayed with you, if any, and what you think they say about us. Until next time, rest easy and sleep well.